Chapter 81, New Materials, Next Generation. After Smaug was confirmed dead, a fiery red egg suddenly appeared in Li Wei's backpack. Incubate it near lava, a prompt instructed. Li Wei pulled the sword free from the dragon's lower jaw and exhaled, signaling the end of the battle. The blade glowed brighter for having slain a dragon and remained unstained by blood. Bard emerged from the cave mouth and stared at the giant carcass, stunned. "The stories were true," he said at last. "Your ancestor really was a remarkable human warrior. From now on, your family will be proud of you, Bard the bowman." Thorin came out of another tunnel and saluted the human archer. Moments later, dwarves poured from the secret passage, cheering. "It's dead," they cried as they surrounded the dragon. Keely, thrilled, kicked the corpse as hard as he could and then stood frozen, grimacing. The dragon did not budge. Feely, arriving a moment later, looked at Killy's unsteady leg. "Still sore? Not fully healed?" he asked. "No, just overwhelmed with joy," Killy insisted. Thorin gathered his clan. "The evil dragon is dead. Our great revenge is fulfilled," he shouted. The dwarves roared their approval. From today, Erebor returns to the reign of Dwalin's clan. After the cheering died down, they began to plan. "First we find the Arkenstone, then we summon reinforcements," someone said. "In the short term, only Dain is likely to make it here," another answered. "Li Wei, how many orcs did you say there were?" Thorin asked. "Not counting the wargs, over 20,000, Li Wei replied. "There are quite a few ogres among them, not sunlight-fearing ogres either. They look like ologs, crossbred and bred by the enemy." The dwarves' faces fell. Jubilation drained away. "What? An army of over 20,000? One demanded. Bard looked bewildered. "Orcs? Wargs?" He had never heard of them. Thorin explained. "An orc army of tens of thousands is marching toward Erebor. They set out from Dol Guldur in the Black Forest and from the mines of Moria, heading north. They could arrive in a few days." Bard quickly ran through the march route in his head. "Then they must pass near Long Lake Town." Panic crept into his voice. An army that size would overwhelm Long Lake. The town had no real standing force, only a modest guard able to handle occasional raids, not a full-scale invasion. "I must go back immediately," Thorin called after him. "If you need it, Erebor can shelter your people." Bard nodded without hesitation. He vaulted over the dragon and was gone. "There's no time to lose. We'll find the Arkenstone now," Thorin said, turning to the rest. He handed out orders. "This dragon," he paused, touching Smaug's hide and glancing at Li Wei, who had been studying the corpse with a focused expression. "Li Wei, do you want anything from it?" "Yes, some of the materials on him will be very useful." "Then take what you need. You earned it," Thorin said, "and it won't count toward your 1/15th. Thorin led the dwarves to the treasury. Only Bilbo and Li Wei remained by the carcass. Bilbo hadn't heard about the approaching army and cared about none of that. For him, the dragon was simply awe-inspiring. After a long stare, he hesitated. "Li Wei, may I take a scale as a memento?" "Of course, Bilbo. There are plenty." "Thank you. I plan to write stories when I get back. This could be a specimen for my book. I collect leaves and flowers, even plant them in my garden." Bilbo tucked a scale into his pocket, chatted a bit more, then followed Thorin to the vault to look for gems. Li Wei set to work harvesting materials from the dragon. Blood, bones, meat, fire dragon scales, the dragon's heart. Smaug was enormous, and he dropped so much loot that Li Wei had to craft a chest just to hold it. As he gathered components, the crafting menu updated. Recipes for dragon scale armor, a line of dragon tools, and the forging method for dragon flame steel unlocked. Dragon flame steel sounded incredible. Armor made from it would far surpass netherite in strength, and weapons would outclass even the ancient elven sword Li Wei now carried. But its manufacture required the fire of a fire dragon, and the last fire dragon in this world, Smaug, had just been slain. Fortunately, the dragon had dropped a fire dragon egg. Once it hatched, Li Wei would have what he needed. Among the expected spoils, Li Wei also found an unexpected drop. Elytra crafting unlocked. In vanilla Minecraft, elytra are uncraftable, found only in end ships, but the giant dragon's materials seem to make up for that. Achievement unlocked. Take off. For the first time, Li Wei could truly fly. He crafted a pair, strapped them on in the cavernous hall, and tried them out. Gliding felt smooth and natural, With fast enough hand control, he would never again fear falling to his death. And for propulsion, fireworks would do the job. With Erebor's gunpowder reserves, Li Wei figured he could fly as much as he wanted. "Time to see Thorin," he murmured, then followed the secret passage toward the smeltery. As he passed the great dwarven furnace, a system prompt filled his view. Erebor, series crafting added. Erebor series multi-block structures added. A massive dwarven industrial system had been added to the crafting menu. High-temperature steel furnaces, bellows, ore transport chains, forging tables, liquid transport pipes. So many options it was hard to take in at once. Aside from the various multi-block constructions, Li Wei also found two familiar entries in the crafting table, a dwarven windlass and black arrows. The windlass only needed its components crafted and assembled. The black arrow required more complex forging and some casting experience. The black arrow also had a loyalty property. Wherever it was loosed, it would always return to its owner's hand, and a special effect against draconic creatures. Built-in armor penetration on impact. More items had been unlocked from Erebor, and one in particular made his heart race. Gears. With gears, he could replicate many redstone functions and automate systems, like the great dwarven doors that once opened the secret passage Smaug used to enter the mountain. A single pull of the right mechanism could lift iron doors 7 or 8 meters high. Returning now, he could upgrade many of the facilities across his lands. Found it! Approaching the cellar, Li Wei heard a familiar voice. Bilbo had found the Arkenstone and handed it to Thorin. The king's gaze locked on the glowing gem. He snatched it from Bilbo with something like impatience and stared at it as if it were the only thing in the world. "Ah, the heart of the mountain, the Arkenstone, so beautiful. My precious." The word made Bilbo flinch as if struck. A shadow crossed his face. He felt suddenly breathless, unease curling in his chest. Far to the north, in the ruined stronghold of Dol Guldur, a vast lidless eye atop a tower turned and fixed itself toward the north. "I sense its presence," Sauron hissed and sent his 9 Nazgul flying. "Go, fetch it." But a voice answered from the approach to the tower. 3 figures were climbing the steps, Elrond of Rivendell, Galadriel of Lothlorien, and Saruman of Isengard. Sauron's great eye narrowed at them, trembling with rage. "Who dares?" Before Sauron could finish, the orc chieftain below led a host to surround the intruders. "If you would spare your lives, there's still time. Turn back," the commander barked. Galadriel's voice was cold and implacable. "Ha! Let us see who kills whom." With a roar, the orcs charged. Galadriel lifted a hand and released a wave of power that rolled outward like a storm. It shook the sky. Even the heavy dark clouds quivered and split with ripples of light. The charging chieftain and his soldiers were crushed into dust by that force. Armor and weapons disintegrated, their scattered pieces smoldering on the ground. When Galadriel said she would destroy, she meant it literally. The Nazgul materialized from the void and attacked the 3 intruders. They unleashed all manner of shadowed arts and mental assaults, but each strike was unmade or repelled. The Nazgul's forms cracked and collapsed, their shapes unthreading and returning to Sauron to be reforged. Enraged, Sauron poured out his full strength. Darkness poured down over Dol Guldur, folding like a living thing around every living being. The pressure crushed at the spirit and the senses. Radagast, who lingered at a distance, was shaken to his core. Saruman watched with widening eyes. The power before him stirred awe and a darker desire. "That is what I crave," he thought, his voice small even to himself. Galadriel answered the darkness with light. She drew forth the starlight of Eärendil, the pale fire born of an ancient Silmaril, and its radiance washed over the tower. Silmaril light is a bane to shadow. Sauron's might faltered and could not fully extend. Pushed back by that brilliance, Sauron was driven from his outer works and forced to retreat to the shadowed lands he called home. For a long time thereafter, the lands would bristle with his presence, but he could not stride freely beyond them. Unaware of the struggle and the weakening of the true master's reach, the ring still worked its corruptions on the hobbit who wore it. Inside the cellar, Li Wei set a cup of milk beside Bilbo. "Here, some milk. Want a cup?" "Thank you, Li Wei. I'm a little thirsty," Bilbo said. He drank greedily, then sighed with satisfaction. "That's better. I feel much refreshed. Milk is nourishing. Perhaps I should have a cup every day." Good to see you up and about, Leeway said. He watched the Hobbit, then added lightly, After this, would you mind coming to my territory? I have some experiments and ideas I could use help with. You won't be in danger, just simple things I want you to try. Bilbo blinked, the sort of trusting, ordinary look that had always been his. I understand. I'd be delighted to visit. Leeway turned away and interrupted the trance. Thorin had fallen into beside the city wall, where the king still held the Arkenstone as if it were a sun. Thorin hesitated, then bowed his head as if waking. Aye, you're right. We should call for reinforcements. At the main gate of Erebor, Thorin released a bird from his hand, a thrush, black with pale spotting on its belly, and let it fly toward the Iron Hills. Balin stepped forward when he saw Leeway watching. Those are thrushes, he explained. Long-lived, a bit magical. They learn to understand our words, and we bred them for carrying messages. The one he sent has lived for. Balin stroked his white beard and glanced at the mountain as if counting years on its stones. Longer than me, maybe. Hundreds of years at least. After all our wanderings, we have finally come home again. But Balin's look went to Thorin, still clutching the Arkenstone at the wall, worry plain on his face. Let us hope we don't repeat old mistakes. You won't, Leeway said quietly. I hope so, Balin murmured. I hope so too, Thorin agreed, though his fingers tightened once more about the gem. Leeway strapped on his elytra and addressed the watching dwarves. Get ready here. I need to leave for a moment, but I'll return soon. I know the stairs are over there, Balin said gently. Leeway grinned, launched himself off the wall, and dove. A chorus of cries followed as the dwarves leaned over the battlements and watched him glide. Rockets hissed somewhere in the air as he performed a brief arc, wings catching the wind, their faces turned up with awe and loud exclamations. Look, wings! I want to try, Bomber called, staring after the departing figure. Bofer glanced at Bomber's broad, heavy build and made a face. For your own safety, perhaps not, he said. Chapter 83, Expedited Intelligence, Long Lake Town. No matter what storms raged beyond its waters, the people here always believed the most important thing was to live the life they had. Life was already hard enough. No matter how earth-shaking the events out there, they couldn't make gold flow into the river. The lake that ringed the town and the busy river were both a source of food and a natural defense. Cut off the bridges, and most attackers could be kept out. But that method would do little against orcs, or so Bard feared. Bane, pack up the things at home. Take your sister and leave. Go north, go as far as you can, find the dwarves. What's happened, father? Why must we leave all of a sudden? Bane's eyes widened, panic rising. Bard leaned in, put both hands on his son's shoulders, and spoke earnestly. Listen, Bane, an orc army is coming. They'll bring slaughter. You cannot stay. And you, I'll warn the townsfolk and get them out. They don't know what's coming yet. Bane opened his mouth to protest, but shut it under his father's intent gaze. He obeyed, preparing to secure his home. Oh, right. I remember 2 elves came by our house. Where did they go? They're still near Long Lake Town. They haven't left. By the bridge, watching the town that often traded with the woodland realm, Legolas frowned. He had a bad feeling he couldn't shake. I feel a shadow approaching, Toriel. Perhaps it's nothing. Toriel replied, eyes fixed to the north. She toyed with a small object in her hand and said slowly, They've gone a long way. If anything had gone wrong, we'd have seen signs by now. Maybe their mission succeeded. They spoke as if about the same thing, yet not quite the same. Lord Legolas, a mounted elf, rode up, his greeting arriving before he did. He stopped before Legolas and reported, His Majesty asks you to return. And Toriel? She has been banished. Tell my father that if Toriel has nowhere to go, neither do I. The messenger could do nothing but shake his head. His only duty was to deliver the king's command. Come then, Toriel. Where? To Gundabad. Why go there? Legolas borrowed the messenger's horse. That's where my mother died in battle. I've never been there. Father never speaks of it. I want to see it. Toriel fell quiet. It was a private pain of the king's. She had no right to comment. Very well, I'll go with you. No sooner had they ridden off than a gray-robed old man came galloping up. He dismounted at the sight of an elf near the bridge. Greetings, gray-robed wanderer, the elf said. Elf of the woodland realm, what brings you here? Gandalf's frown told of unease. I came to ask Lord Legolas to return. Legolas, Ah, that prince has a temper. This likely didn't go smoothly. Yes, he borrowed my horse and rode for Gundabad. Gundabad? Gandalf's face grew grave. Why would he go there for no good reason? Foolish. The situation is no place for such impulses, someone hissed. A sudden familiar roar split the air, like the launch of fireworks in the Shire. No explosion, only the whoosh of ascent. A figure glided in circles above them, then, noticing the gray-robed wizard, changed course and dove, plunging into the water nearby. Gandalf, what are you doing here? Leeway swam ashore, folded his elytra, and nodded at the elf beside him. I was going to ask you the same. How are things on your side? Gandalf visibly relaxed. That dragon is dead. Bard and I killed it together. You might not know Bard. He's a descendant of Girion, Lord of the River Valley. He did most of the work. With a black arrow, he wounded the dragon so severely I could finish it. Truly remarkable, Gandalf thought a moment. This might make things easier. We can send the townsfolk to take refuge in Erebor. Its walls may not stop a dragon, but they'll hold against orcs. Thorin has probably already secured the Arkenstone. If we can hold until reinforcements arrive, the place can be defended. Leeway agreed. Listening to them, the Woodland Realm elf's expression grew more serious. He stepped forward. Gandalf, may I borrow your horse? If you need it, take it. I've reached where I must be, no longer need it. Thank you. The elf left quickly, no doubt to report to his king. I need to go into town and warn the people. Most of them don't know what's coming, Gandalf said, hurrying off. What about you, Leeway? Anything I can help with? My purpose is the same. Bard came ahead of me, actually. I wanted to check on him. Since you're here, I'm not needed. Leeway flexed his elytra and produced a bundle of fireworks, eager to launch. I'll go do what I'm best at, build walls, set traps. With a crack of ignited fireworks, his elytra snapped open and thrust him skyward. He glided off toward the lonely mountain. Gandalf clicked his tongue, impressed but focused on his task. In the town square, Bard had already gathered the residents. People of Long Lake, listen. An orc army is marching toward us. They'll be here in a few days at most. We cannot face them here. We must evacuate now. The crowd erupted into murmurs and fear. Though some doubted, many trusted Bard and began making plans. But where should we go? To the lonely mountain. The king under the mountain has promised shelter. You're lying. A disheveled man pushed through the crowd with a swollen left eye bandaged, pointing at Bard. You thief! You escaped convict. The first thing you do is spread panic among the townsfolk. Alfred, what I'm saying is true. Even if our champion were telling the truth, Alfred spat, why go to the lonely mountain, a place with a dragon? Do you want to hand the people over to it? I think you've already been put under its spell. You came back to harm our people. I'll have you arrested again. 2 armored guards stepped forward to seize Bard. He's telling the truth. Just then, Gandalf pushed past the guards and stood between them and the crowd. There is no dragon to fear. That dragon was slain by this master archer Bard and by Leeway from the wilds. Together, Erebor is safe. Oh, the wizard's words carried weight. The crowd cheered and surged toward Bard, chanting Dragon Slayer. Bard raised his hands to calm them. Enough! Alfred erupted in anger and aimed invective at Gandalf. You vagrant! Who are you to tell us anything? I say the people of Long Lake Town will not leave. No step. You. Gandalf, provoked, raised his staff and struck. Alfred's face went slack and he fell, unconscious. The blow landed on his uninjured eye, leaving him with a bruise that gave him a startled panda-like look. Gandalf muttered, I can't stand being called a beggar. Chapter 84. Army Marches Out. The people of Long Lake Town hurried back to their homes and began packing whatever belongings and food they could carry. This time, no one had been hurt or killed. Everyone prepared to evacuate in an orderly fashion toward the promised safe haven. Maybe this is the start of a new life, some said. To be honest, I don't feel any different, a townsman grumbled. Almost all the wealth is in the mayor's hands. Apart from a roof over our heads, what do we actually have? If Bard hadn't kept fighting for us, many wouldn't even have enough to eat, another answered. I heard there's River Valley near Erebor, the place our ancestors lived. They were prosperous and happy once. I hope we can have that again. Bard listened quietly. He remembered the king's promise Thorin had mentioned. Perhaps it could be used to rebuild their homeland and restore River Valley. Even without the Aoke army's threat, Long Lake Town had never been an ideal place to live. It was, after all, a floating town in the middle of a lake. With limited building materials, primitive construction techniques, and years of neglected maintenance, the town grew smaller each year and could support fewer people. Sooner or later, it would have to be rebuilt or relocated. If this crisis could be turned into an opportunity to resettle some townspeople on solid ground, that would be a small blessing. While Long Lake Town bustled with preparations, an elf messenger returned to the throne in the Black Forest and delivered a string of reports. Gundabad, Thranduil murmured, rubbing a headache. Why had Legolas wandered there for no reason? Didn't he know the place was full of orcs? The king sighed, grateful that nothing worse had happened so far, and relieved that Legolas seemed safe, accompanied by Toriel. Then he asked the next question. Any other news? The answer was startling. A dragon had been slain by Li Wei and another human, and the dwarves had reclaimed Erebor. Thranduil felt the immediate urge to mobilize and reclaim what belonged to the woodland realm, but the reports also spoke of tens of thousands of elite troops in the Oke army advancing nearby. Thranduil paused to consider. Gandalf had urged the woodland realm to send aid. Erebor and Long Lake were extremely close to the Black Forest, closer than Li Wei's home was to Bree, as close as a neighbor where trouble could arrive in less than a day. If Erebor and River Valley fell, the woodland realm might be encircled by orcs and spiders and cut off entirely. And Legolas was still there. With his stubborn streak, he would not flee and would surely be on the battlefield. Thranduil rose and ordered his adjutant, "Prepare armor and weapons. Assemble our best. We ride to reclaim what is ours and to support our allies." "Allies?" the adjutant asked, puzzled. "Weren't the enemies only dwarves?" "Li Wei and Gandalf and the people of Long Lake will need help," Thranduil replied. "As for the dwarves, if they return what is rightfully ours and ask sincerely, we may consider aiding them." An elite elven host marched out, taking with them stores of aid. Far to the east in the Iron Hills, Dane listened to the thrush's message and grew grave. "It seems Thorin needs help. All lads whose shields have been stained with orc blood, follow me," Dane roared. Dwarves donned armor, harnessed chariots, mounted goats and boars, and rode for Erebor. Smaller than the elven host but no less elite, the Iron Hills levy had something the rest of Middle-earth lacked in abundance: iron. Weapons, armor, chariots, heavy crossbows. Erebor's workshops and forges still had plenty of hardware, though coffers were thin. In short, they had everything but money. Two great forces, the elves and the dwarves, set their faces toward Erebor. At Erebor itself, Li Wei stood on a high ridge overlooking the wide, ruined valley and the shattered city and felt overwhelmed. Building a truly defensive wall here was no trivial matter. A proper fortification would be more than a few 100,000 blocks. Even pouring lava and water where needed would take enormous work. Covering the entire battlefield with a wall was impossible, but protecting the city was doable. It was time to show the orcs what the Wall of Sighs could do. Li Wei tried to claim the ruins of River Valley from a vantage point. A system prompt flashed up instead. Claim failed. "Already has an owner?" he muttered. He couldn't claim land or buildings that already belonged to someone else, just like the towns and faction capitals he had seen. Of course, Bard, the descendant of the lord of this land, still lived and retained legitimate title to River Valley. "Bard, thank the gods it's Bard," Li Wei said. If he asked Bard, "You wouldn't want to see your people suffer, would you?" Bard would give up the territory without hesitation. For now, though, there was work to do. With lava in one hand, a bucket of water in the other, and a backpack full of materials, Li Wei set to work on a defensive wall, running occasionally to Erebor to ask the dwarves to stoke their furnaces and pour molten rock. "What do you need so much lava for?" Dwalin asked in the smelter, wiping his brow as ore rumbled down the chute into the great furnace. "That's a marvelous tool that will be used in a few days," Li Wei said. "In a few days? Do you intend to burn the orcs to death with it? They aren't dumb enough to leap into lava, you know." "Just keep pouring. This lava will come in handy," Li Wei said mysteriously. "By the way, where do you store your ore? I might need some." "You should ask Balin or Thorin about that," Dwalin replied. "They know the workings here better." Before Thorin's throne, Li Wei explained, "I'll need a lot of iron and some gunpowder." Thorin chuckled. Li Wei, you may not realize it, but though Erebor was overrun a century ago, many of its mineral deposits and metal reserves remain untouched. If you have the skill, there's enough metal here to forge thousands of sets of iron armor. It's just ore, Thorin added magnanimously. Use what you need. Thorin had a sense of humor. One man, in a few days, how could he possibly strip Erebor bare? Chapter 85, High Walls. The mayor of Long Lake Town woke as if the sky had fallen in. People were packing in the streets, carts and bundles everywhere. He snatched a half-eaten butter mushroom lamb egg from the table, bit into it, and swallowed a glass of strong liquor in one gulp. Wiping his greasy hands on his coat, he barked, "Alfred, where is he? Someone tell me what's happening." He burst out of the house and grabbed the nearest townsman. "Where are you all going?" "The Aoki army is coming. We're going to Erebor for refuge," the man said, then snatched his arm away as if the mayor smelled bad and hurried off, circling away from him. "What army? What Erebor? Why didn't anyone tell me about this?" the mayor shouted, red-faced. He was used to being the center of every town decision. "If you have any sense left, pack and leave now." A voice at his shoulder cut through his rage. "Bard. Weren't you locked up? You daring to run from prison? Guards! Arrest him!" The mayor's shout drew attention. A few guards hurried over, whispering and filling him in on what little they knew. Bard, standing nearby and sweating from the march, met the mayor's glare with a calm look. The mayor's main concern wasn't the dragon or the town's safety. It was whether he could profit from whatever came next. A dragon-slaying hero would be very good for business. From behind the mayor, an old man in a gray robe had stepped forward. The mayor recoiled and pulled a handkerchief to his nose. "Where did this stinking beggar come from?" Gandalf drew himself up politely. "I am not a beggar. I am Gandalf the Grey. I have news and advice. I don't care if you're a beggar or a wizard. Out of my way." The mayor shoved him aside and pushed through toward his house, barking to the guards. "What are you standing there for? Help me move my things." The guards hesitated, torn between the mayor's demands and the urgency of the evacuation. Gandalf gripped his staff. Bard nodded once at the old man. With a single, firm strike, the staff landed on the mayor's head. The heavy fellow, no thinner than Bomber, crumpled in a heap among his sundries. "Help the townspeople," Gandalf said quietly. The guards needed no second invitation. They ran off to marshal the evacuees. A few people clapped in relief. With Bard's presence and Gandalf's authority, the crowd organized quickly. They gathered what they could carry, enough food for a time, and began moving toward Erebor. Bard took charge of arrangements, sweating as he did the work of a leader for the first time. The mayor and his deputy had both fainted in the confusion. Bard was effectively the leader now, and he would not have managed without Gandalf's help. They marched in a subdued procession, mostly eating dry rations and keeping their heads down. As they neared the lonely mountain valley, someone pointed and cried out, "Look, are those city walls? So tall!" The crowd turned, eyes widening. Smoke and a sudden roar of launching fireworks rose above the distant ramparts. Gandalf smiled. "That means it's occupied." "Dale?" someone asked. "Yes," Bard answered. "I know that place well." "Wasn't it ruined?" a voice murmured. Gandalf scanned the view and nodded. "It seems we don't need to go all the way to Erebor. Let's go see the walls at Dale." Bard, trusting Gandalf and the whispers that linked the wizard to Li Wei, agreed. They approached the massive gates. Gandalf called up, "Is anyone there?" A mechanism creaked, and then 3 heavy iron doors rose in sequence. From the top of the wall, a figure leaned over and called down, "Gandalf." "Li Wei," Gandalf replied. He measured the construction at a glance, 30 meters high and about 6 meters thick, a solid, forbidding mass. The wall wasn't neatly coursed masonry. It looked like a single, monolithic stone block, roughly hewn. Below the gate, Gandalf felt heat as if something burned within the gatehouse. "Don't just stand there. Come in," Li Wei called, then dropped down and met them at the gate. The townsfolk streamed through and stopped in the open plaza behind the rampart, staring at the shelter in disbelief. "Light fires and cook," Li Wei told them. "Rest here for now." Once families were settled, Bard and Gandalf climbed the crude stair Li Wei had erected and went up onto the wall with him to look over the valley. Dale lay in the basin between the mountain ridges. Only one side of the valley was accessible. which meant Li Wei had only needed to fortify that single approach. The wall itself had been erected quickly, already reinforced with traps, pits and contraptions that could drop invaders into lava or deep cavities. Gandalf leaned on his pipe, pleased. This is far tougher than a normal town wall. Most walls are built brick by brick. Yours looks carved out of the mountain in one piece, like a natural stone block. I see almost no joints. Bard stared. How could this be built so fast? Even if every person from Long Lake Town had worked day and night with unlimited supplies, a wall like this would take years. Gandalf exhaled a ring of smoke, as if amused. There are many things you cannot imagine. Bard fumbled for words and thought of the pumpkins, rows of patched fields below the rampart. Gandalf pointed at them. What are those for? I remember you mentioning that making such a puppet requires pumpkins. Li Wei's answer was a small smirk. For now, no, he said. Not yet. Not yet? Gandalf pressed. This depends on the descendant of our Lord of Dale, Li Wei said, stepping closer to Bard. His voice dropped and took on an edge. Master Bard, you wouldn't want to see the people of Long Lake Town suffer, would you? Chapter 86. Imminent War. What do you mean by that? Bard was still trying to process the fact that Li Wei had built such a massive city wall practically by himself. He hadn't expected the conversation to turn to him so quickly. Of course I don't want to see war. Even without it, the townspeople have suffered enough. Then it's time for you to choose. Li Wei looked at him and explained, calm and direct. Bard, as a descendant of Girion, Lord of the River Valley, you hold the rightful inheritance of this land. The whole world recognizes that right. Now you must renounce it and transfer ownership of the River Valley to me. If you do, I can guarantee your safety. I promise you that. Bard shook his head. This place is already a ruin. So what is your answer? Before I answer, may I make a request? Speak. I want the people to have a place to live. No more poverty, hunger, or homelessness. Li Wei chuckled and patted Bard on the shoulder. I'm not some villain who'll swallow this place whole. The people may live wherever they want. I won't drive them away. Bard looked at Li Wei with a tangled expression, then glanced at the old man nearby, smoking and stealing quick looks. He sighed. I always feel like you two are playing with me. All right, then. By my oath as a descendant of the Lord of the River Valley, I, Bard, renounce my right of inheritance to this land and transfer it to Li Wei. Agreement effective, Gandalf said from the side. Territory River Valley created. Territory count 2. Congratulations on making the right choice, Gandalf added. Next, I'm heading to the Lonely Mountain. We'll see each other later. Wait, let me come. I'm about to visit Thorin. Gandalf tucked away his pipe and prepared to descend. You can catch up later. Before Bard could protest, Li Wei had already put on his elytra and flown away in a flash of fireworks. Gandalf's weathered face twitched. I don't think I'll ever be able to keep up with him. A short while later, a large portion of the Lonely Mountain's mineral reserves vanished, and in the river valley, the townspeople noticed 3-meter-tall iron golems wandering the streets. The clanking of their footsteps was loud and even terrifying. Some of the younger children, too little to grasp what was happening, began to cry at the sight of the huge figures. The noise drew several golems, which slowed and loomed over the sobbing children. Remembering the wizard's and Li Wei's instructions, Bard gritted his teeth and resisted drawing his sword, and he stopped a few guards from intervening. The tall golems extended their iron arms toward the children. At the ends of their metallic hands were bright, living splashes of color. Is that a flower? Bard was surprised. The children were too. Their attention shifted to the vivid blooms in the golem's hands. They reached out, took the flowers, and smiled. Everyone, don't be afraid, Bard shouted from a high point. These golems are Li Wei's creations to protect us. They're friendly. Li Wei? Is he a wizard? Someone asked, curious. When people thought of magic, wizard was usually the first image that came to mind. I'm not sure what to call him, Bard answered, but the man I mean is the one they call the Wild's Legend, the enemy of orcs, the master of marvelous construction magic, a powerful one among men, the Dragon Slayer, Li Wei. The residents were stunned. So all those titles are for the same person? Nearby, people laughed at the long list of names. A man who hadn't heard the legends scratched his head and muttered, embarrassed. No one besides Bard knew how many titles Liyue really had, and no one knew how many enemies he already had. Far away on a mountain in Gundabad, Legolas and Toriel stood against the wind while Legolas spoke softly of this place's history. "This land is perilous, Toriel. In ages past, our kin bled here. My mother died here. My father never spoke of her. There's not even a grave, no memory." Toriel had no reply when a vast shadow cut across the sky. Legolas grabbed her, and they ducked behind a rock. "What are those things?" "Bats. Warborn, usually the orcs' scouts," Toriel answered. A heavy horn sounded. Waves of well-armed orcs poured out of Gundabad's bastion in perfect ranks, marching forth. A tall, burly orc stood on a rise, roaring commands. "Full speed ahead!" "That's Bolg, son of Azog," Legolas said. His voice tightened. Bolg had been one of the trackers they'd set out to find, and now he was back in Gundabad, rallying an army. "We must return and warn them." They rode hard toward the Lonely Mountain, but time was already running out. Not far from Lonely Mountain, the earth shook with a boom. A gigantic worm broke through the ground, its razor teeth crushing boulders into dust. It burrowed back down, leaving tunnels nearly 10 meters across, dozens of them, leading straight to Lone Mountain. A dire wolf rider burst from a cave to report to a pale orc. "Master, our army will be in position by tomorrow at the latest and can quickly reach the battlefield." "Very good." Azog flipped a raw piece of meat and fed it to the white warg king beside him, then mounted the beast and rode up to a vantage point to look over the muster of his forces raised in Moria's shadows. Orcs and wargs packed the slopes. On both sides, giant beasts, 7 or 8 meters tall, carried catapults on their backs. Each beast was controlled by 2 or more orcs. There were also modified monsters, eyes gouged out, arms refashioned into flails, legs replaced with spiked iron balls. Small ogres, 3 or 4 meters tall, swung clubs bigger than a man. Behind them marched elite ologs, armored to the teeth, skin like stone, not harmed by sunlight, and almost impervious to ordinary weapons. These were Sauron's latest engineered horrors, battlefield terrors that, if sent forward, could overwhelm any line. The thought of facing such forces made Liyue, back in the river valley, speed up his creation of iron golems. He drained another chunk of Lonely Mountain's reserves and summoned wave after wave of constructs. He had no idea how many he'd made when Bard came running up to him. "Look." Liyue paused and followed the gesture. Across the plain, a glittering field of gold shimmered under the sun, an elven host. "Elves." Liyue breathed out and halted his work. "The woodland realm has arrived." Thanks to Taoist Friend of the Book Mountain for the 500 coin reward. Thanks to the children. This is very delicious for the 500 coin reward. Thanks to Madly Mad for the 500 coin reward. Thanks to Jun for the 500 coin reward. Thanks to Jim Liu 2000 for the 200 coin reward. Thanks to Space Odyssey 3001 for the 100 coin reward. Thanks to Silent for the 100 coin reward. And thanks to all my friends who voted. Thank you for your support. Let the battle begin. Chapter 87, Warlong Lake Town. Empty houses, no people. The mayor crawled out from under a heap of rubble, sneezed and shivered. It was bitterly cold. "Everyone's gone, Mr. Mayor. We should leave too," a familiar voice suggested from a nearby step. Alfred sat there calmly, far removed from the usual arrogance he showed the townsfolk. He looked older, steadier. Before the mayor, alone, this assistant seemed slightly superior in poise and guile, the sort of quiet control that came from working things from behind the scenes. In front of Bard, Alfred relied on bluster and authority. Here he could be subtle. His eyes were still swollen from the cold. "Go? Go where?" "To Erebor, of course. There's room there. Weapons. It's the safest place." "One ghost would go to a place full of orcs," the mayor grumbled as he rose, heaving a pile of valuables out of the ruined house. "Sir, where are you going? Anywhere's better than staying." With a splash, treasure was loaded onto a boat. The mayor rowed northwest. Alfred watched the retreating silhouette, opened his mouth, then closed it. He gathered some valuables and headed for Erebor. River Valley City, the walls rebuilt, the elven army of the woodland realm arrayed outside. Thranduil, mounted on a moose, studied the new high wall with a frown. "Is the lord of this city present?" he called. A head popped up over the parapet. "Of course I am. Liyue?" Thranduil's brow eased with recognition. The gate rumbled open. "Come in. Don't stand outside. Let's talk." I saw you long ago. I've been waiting, Thranduil said, then peered inward at the smooth marching lines. You've brought iron golems? They're friendly, came the reply. Don't be afraid. Thranduil signaled, and his soldiers flowed through the gate with mechanical precision. The golems fell into their own lanes, and the combined armies spread neatly through the streets. Distribute supplies, Thranduil ordered, and elves began handing out food and vegetables from the woodland realm. The townspeople cheered. Winter was coming. The extra provisions and wine Thranduil had brought raised spirits considerably. Thranduil did not take the gratitude to heart. I did not come just to help, he told Leeway and Bard on the wall. I am here to reclaim what belongs to my people. Bard and Leeway exchanged a faint smile. Elves always spoke as though charity were incidental. Bard acknowledged the aid. Leeway, who'd planted pumpkin fields, knew the food was only sufficient but real. When Thranduil tapped the new wall with his sword and remarked that it seemed grown from the earth rather than built stone by stone, Leeway demonstrated by forming 2 blocks with a gesture. Construction magic, Thranduil murmured, impressed and wary. We didn't expect our ally to be so powerful. Gandalf is here too, Leeway added. Thranduil glanced toward Erebor. He's speaking with Thorin. He won't return soon. Thranduil stayed to oversee camp organization. Bard helped organize the Long Lake refugees. Leeway leapt down the wall and in an instant rose and flew toward Erebor. In Erebor's treasury, Thorin fitted a mithril shirt on Bilbo with clumsy pride. No sword will pierce this. It's as fine as, if not finer than, your armor, Leeway. Bilbo protested, anxious and small. I'm not a warrior. It's a huge gift. Thorin smiled in a way that still bore the dragon sickness, but generosity had not entirely left him. Gandalf arrived, and with grave news, told Thorin he had already sent word to Dain in the Iron Hills. Reinforcements were on the way. Thorin's chest swelled. No one will touch our treasure. Gandalf's face tightened. The old wizard had seen this before. The greed that settled on Durin's line at Erebor, the malady nearly as corrupting as the One Ring. Thorin, you are ill. Put the Arkenstone down. It's not too late. Give up the Arkenstone? The thing I found after all this? Give up being king under the mountain? Thorin sneered and stalked away from Gandalf's pleading. If you won't listen, then I'll speak to Leeway, Thorin muttered to himself as he consoled his wounded pride. He owes me. At the ore storerooms, Thorin's confidence faltered. He swung the doors wide and found cavernous emptiness where mounds of ore should have been. He staggered back, breathless. I may have gotten lost. Somewhere, he murmured. Killy shut the doors and led Thorin to the wall for fresh air. Leeway descended and stood before the two, cheerful. Hello. Thorin's face went sour. Leeway, our ore. I'm sorry, Leeway said lightly, but I just saw Gandalf leave. Did you two talk? Before conversation could proceed, the gates of River Valley City opened, rows of elves in golden armor pouring out. Thorin's alarm bell pealed and the dwarves rushed to arms. Elves, Dwalin spat. They mean to take our treasure. Thranduil stepped forward, calm. Thorin, son of Thrain, you have reclaimed Erebor. Return to my people what belongs to them, and I will withdraw. Thorin snapped. You'll not take a single coin from me. Balin tugged at his cloak, trying to reason. Gandalf stepped up and cried, These treasures will ruin you, Thorin. Bard reminded Thorin of the promise and demanded the elven riches be returned. Before Thorin could answer, a horn sounded on a nearby incline. The elite army of Iron Hills had arrived. Dain Ironfoot stood at their head, ready, and Thorin felt relief flood him. He was about to call for battle when a sudden flying kick sent him sprawling and smothered his words. Leeway had seized the moment and smacked Thorin down, drawing every eye. Dain shouted from the hill, puzzled, but no one dared challenge Leeway. His presence froze the tense air like a blade across a throat. Some of the dwarves whispered names, others protested, but Leeway began to placate them, joking and apologizing loudly until heads nodded and tempers cooled. Bilbo, recovering from fright, edged forward and asked him quietly if he would harm Thorin. Leeway sheathed his sword. Of course not. Look how shaken everyone is. Before anything else could happen, the mountain itself roared. Huge tunnels split open. Gigantic worms chewed through stone and monstrous shapes poured out. Orcs and giant beasts spilled from the earth, and the dwarf formation tensed. Center army, attack! Form ranks! Dain barked, raising his spear wall against the onslaught. Azog, watching from the mountain, cursed the strange underground heat that scalded some of his beasts, but pressed forward. The orc host swept over the field like a black cloud. Bard hurried back to organize Long Lake's militia. On Erebor's walls, Keely, Feely, and other dwarves thudded their chests and called to fight, until Thorin's voice called for them to stand by, and they froze. Thorin's hesitance turned to a shadow again. Bilbo, unwilling to wait, tied a rope and slid down the wall. Gandalf followed, assuring the hobbit to stay close. Thranduil observed with approval. For a hobbit, Bilbo was brave indeed. Keely strained to go after Bilbo, but Balin held him. The king had not ordered the charge. Dwarves obeyed orders first. The first wave of orcs slammed into the dwarf shield wall. "Where's Lee Wei?" Gandalf muttered. Then, with a light whoosh, rows of elves sprang across the dwarves' shields, blades flashing. Their footfalls barely troubled the formation. They leapt onto spear shafts, struck, and vanished. When the elves faltered under sheer weight of numbers, Dane's shouts rang out, and the dwarves surged forward in a thundering charge. "Dwarf bravery will not allow others to charge ahead," he roared, hammer swinging, flattening orcs with each blow. But the tide of foes was vast, and somewhere inside Erebor's great hall, Thorin sat immobile. Dwalin's eyes shone with tears as he confronted him at the throne. "Get out, don't make me kill you myself." Thorin's mind echoed with the voices of friends and foes alike. Gandalf's warning, Bard's reproach, Balin's plea, Elrond's lament. Most of all, Lee Wei's "Where was Lee Wei?" Suddenly Thorin realized the man was standing in the hall and was about to answer him when Lee Wei crossed the floor, punched him in the face, and then shoved a bucket under his chin. "Stop talking. Drink this," Lee Wei insisted, pouring milk down Thorin's throat until he choked and gasped. The action was ridiculous, absurd, and brutally earnest. The milk washed through fogged thought, and Thorin's eyes cleared a little as the madness of the Arkenstone and throne began to recede. "Enough!" Thorin pushed the bucket away, then wiped milk from his mouth. For the first time in months, real clarity returned. He ripped the crown from his head and hurled it aside, pulled his helmet on, and roared with the full strength of a king. "I am not my grandfather," he shouted. The trumpet of Erebor answered. The alarm bell struck. The gates swung wide. 13 figures surged out in a surge of battle lust. Dain, seeing Thorin at the front, felt invincible and led the charge. The dwarves' ferocity redoubled, the orcs staggered and were driven back into their tunnels. Gandalf swung Glamdring. Bilbo fought beside him with surprising steadiness. At last, from the open gates strode a warrior in black armor, an elven long sword at his side, and sunlight on the blade. The orcs recoiled. Gandalf's mouth curved. "I finally waited for you," he said. The battle had fully begun. Battle overview. Free peoples, humans, dwarves, elves. Commanders Gandalf, Thranduil, Dane Ironfoot, Bard the Bowman, Thorin Oakenshield, Lee Wei. Enemies, orcs, wargs. Commanders, Azog, Bolg. Estimated numerical ratio, free peoples, orcs 1-5. The battle raged on. Thanks to Shushan Yalida for the 1,000-point reward. Thanks to Yinyo Kangling for 500 points. Thanks to Bookfriend, 20U2921, 157478816. Libuki Dayan, Yanglu Yi Li Qingzhao for 100 points each. Thanks to all the friends who voted and supported me. 3-in-1 plus a long chapter. Will it be better to combine them like this? Chapter 88, Garrison Dragon Sickness clung to Erebor like a stubborn curse, seeping from the mountain's treasure and poisoning anyone who came near. A drink of milk could not break it, only clear its effects for a few moments. As long as one remained inside this great mountain, the influence would return. But the milk had bought Thorin a clarity he had not had in weeks. He realized what he had been doing, and that realization hardened into immunity. At Erebor's gate, the surrounding orcs were cut down in a few swift moves. Suddenly the front line quieted. The dwarves and elves, freed, surged forward to clear the rest. "You finally came out, Lee Wei," Gandalf said, hurrying over. "The situation isn't too bad," Gandalf added as they conferred. "More than half of their forces and the siege beasts are still outside the wall. If we block the one breach that leads inside, we stop their advance." Beneath the battlefield, a ring of flowing magma had been laid. Most of the tunneling worms that should have reached the city wall had failed against it. Only those that were supposed to surface outside the wall opened properly. The only mistake was on the mountain's eastern slope, where the worms had somehow tunneled above the magma and opened one entrance. That one tunnel had let the vanguard and a handful of giant beasts through. To Li Wei, that tunnel shouldn't have existed. It looked forced, like a piece jammed into a gap. Gandalf peered toward the distant hole. Their original plan didn't account for the sudden defensive constructions, he guessed. If I could foresee it, I'd be possessed, Li Wei muttered. I'll check that hole. The dwarven cavalry can cover you, Gandalf suggested. Their goats are sure-footed, perfect for that terrain. Goats. Li Wei glanced at the dwarven mounts. Those goats were impressive. Where there was a foothold, they could climb like nothing, up to the eagle nests on the misty mountains. For rugged terrain, they were better than horses. He made a mental note, maybe raise some. For now, he donned his elytra, picked up a firework, and launched into the sky toward the eastern tunnel, still spewing orcs. An ogre lumbered out just as Li Wei approached. Spotting an unidentified flying object in the sky, it raised its huge club to strike. Li Wei dropped, armor sealing around him in a flash. He landed in a crushing collision, a swing. The longsword plunged through the ogre's skull, and by momentum, both slid across the ground before stopping. The ogre was utterly dead. It tumbled into a scattering of orcs and knocked them aside. A skill orb fell. Basic swordsmanship. Not bad, Li Wei thought, and instantly upgraded the skill. Where did this human come from? Kill him! The orcs bellowed, surging in waves from the deep pits of Moria. These orcs were more vicious than those of the Misty Mountains. They rushed to surround and rend him. But they'd miscalculated. Under the sweeping edge enchantment, a single arc set a whole row of orcs alight. They fell screaming, burning, then went quiet. Yet the orcs kept coming. Cut down they might be, but new ranks filled the gaps like water. Li Wei's mind wandered to an old jest. Forget 2,000 orcs. If 2,000 pigs were running, you couldn't chop them all down in 3 days. Someone had shoved a heap of TNT into the tunnel and placed it in the middle. With a strike of flint, the fuses caught. Li Wei sprinted back out of the tunnel just as it blew, the blast carving a crater that severed the channel. The army behind stalled. Taking the opening, Li Wei built up blocks, scrambled to the tunnel's rim, and poured bucketfuls of magma into the breach. A wall of molten rock sealed the only entrance. He did it! Bilbo at the rear exclaimed at the glow of lava pouring from the fissure. No, he finished it, Gandalf corrected. The counterattack began. With the outer incursion blocked, only the vanguard remained inside the wall. The leaders rallied their forces and moved to encircle them. Li Wei threw a few more blocks into the breach's mouth, then launched himself back into the fray. Wait for me, someone shouted. I want to farm skill orbs. The old tale of the wilderness's killer made itself true again. The orc vanguard, trapped and surrounded, fought ferociously. If this had been any other time, they would have collapsed long ago. But now they charged relentlessly, even after suffering heavy losses. The dwarves were furious with vengeance and led by capable commanders. The orcs, yes, had their own leaders and grudges. Azog, far across the field, smashed a stone and changed his orders on the fly when he recognized that black shape once more, Li Wei. It had to be his doing wherever things went wrong. He pointed to a new target. Break through the city wall, Azog roared. A dozen siege beasts aligned and threw themselves against the wall. Orcs hauled 2- and 3-meter boulders into the sky. Whoosh! The stones crashed against the smooth city wall, but the wall did not crumble. Instead, bits of block fell away where the stones hit, as if it were tougher than expected. Azog blinked. He'd seen River Valley walls. Even the White City wasn't that resilient. What's going on? Bolg, his adjutant, demanded. He dragged an orc scout forward by the collar. I didn't see these walls when I scouted a few days ago. The scout stammered. Bolg threatened him and tossed him aside. It's that enemy wizard who manipulates blocks, Li Wei, Azog barked. Get a small team, many archers. Bolg left to assemble the troops. The horns sounded. Azog once again set the siege in motion. A towering ogre with a conical boulder barreled at the wall. Long Lake Town's hunters, rangers, and longbowmen focused fire on it, but could not pierce its hide. Thump, the lowest layer of the wall was knocked away. The siege continued relentlessly. But unseen behind the wall, the iron golems had been drawn into position and waited. In the dusty armory of River Valley, Bard coordinated townsfolk into arms. Grab anything you can fight with. Armor up, to the walls with the combatants. Women, children, and the old, get to safety. Bard barked. River Valley had a surprising cache of weapons left from its prosperous days, forgotten because of the dragon. With the iron collected, even common citizens could hold a line. Bard glanced around and caught someone making a metallic clatter. He hauled the person by the collar. "Alfred?" The woman squealed, high-pitched and terrified. Bard yanked a handful of coins from Alfred's shirt and shoved a sword into his hand. "Don't make me find you in the rear," he said, tossing him forward. At that moment, the rear gate toward Erebor opened. Elves and dwarves streamed in, moving toward the high walls. Thranduil found Bard. "We have cleared the orcs inside the wall. How are things here?" "They cannot break through for now," Bard replied, glancing at the fat, unmoving wall and the iron golems clustered about it. With this equipment, he felt safer. Even if the wall failed, the golems would hold. Dane hurtled up on a wild boar and waved impatiently. "Let my men use the wider stairs. Our heavy crossbows won't get up narrow steps." Thranduil obliged, and Thorin led his expeditionaries forward. The two kings met, and Thorin surprised him. "After this, I would like to invite the king of the Wood Elves to Erebor for talks." Thranduil lifted his chin and answered with haughty courtesy, "I accept." His arrogance did not provoke Thorin. They accepted and charged for the wall together. Leeway and Gandalf arrived just behind them. "Wait, you don't have to," Gandalf began. Leeway snapped together a few stone blocks, widening the staircases by a few steps. "This is more practical than some of Gandalf's magic," Dain grinned as he signaled his dwarves to haul up the heavy crossbows. Gandalf's expression stiffened. Dwarves shouted and fired. Balin, steady as ever, loosed a special heavy bolt that spun and struck a charging flank beast, sending it tumbling. The dwarves laughed and kept firing. The elves loosed volleys in parallel, precision and deadly grace. Arrows and heavy bolts tore through the orc lines. Azog barked new orders. "Put large beasts in front. Archers cover." "Dwarven axe, fire!" he cried. The heavy crossbow bolts boomed. The Ologs in the rear advanced to shield the siege beasts. They took bolts and stood. Catapults retaliated, hurling boulders. One smashed the parapet near Balin's crossbow, and but for the stubborn toughness of Leeway's wall, he would have been crushed. Stones kept falling. Orc archers emerged from tunnels and peppered the wall. The siege beasts pressed again, and the wall shook. "Leeway," Thorin called, alarmed. "Can you breach a hole in the wall, just big enough for me to jump onto that beast?" "I'll handle it." "Too dangerous," Keely objected. "I'll go with you." Keely and Feely volunteered, worried about preserving the royal line. Thorin dismissed it. Leeway's light words cut through their worry. Click, the mechanism triggered. As a siege beast reached the wall, the ground under it slid. A horizontal gate in the wall snapped open, and lava glowed red beneath. The beast fell into the pit with a terrible roar that echoed through the valley and then went silent. Orc faces went pale. "Move our materials. Fill the roads. Avoid strange weak spots. Attack from several directions," Azog ordered. On the wall, Leeway turned to Bard. "Gather your archers. No, everyone. I'll give you stuff." "Stuff?" Bard repeated. "Crossbows and fireworks." Leeway's reply was curt. Bard hesitated, but trusted Leeway enough to follow his instructions. Leeway placed a workbench, fed it iron, wood, string, and produced 100 crossbows. Then he created a pile of multi-explosion fireworks from his inventory, lining them up as bizarre ammunition. "Show me," Bard said, uncertain. Leeway loaded a firework like an arrow into the crossbow and fired. It flew true and burst among the orcs. Flames, explosions, and screams followed. Bard took a breath, loaded, and shouted orders. "Teach the townsfolk how to load and fire." Soon 100 human crossbowmen stood on the wall, neatly arrayed. Gandalf looked up and away, uninterested, until Leeway shouted, "Aim, fire!" 100 fireworks arced out, exploding across the orc ranks. Armor blistered black. Several ogres were blown apart. Azog wiped his brow. This was chaos. Then one firework detonated midair. "It doesn't reach far," he realized. "Fall back 100 meters." The orc formation retreated. Leeway donned his elytra. Gandalf watched. He knew that whenever Leeway strapped those wings on, he would be going somewhere dangerous. "What now?" "Decapitation," Leeway said simply. He leapt from the wall and shot skyward. Orc archers fired upward, scratching his skin with a few arrows. Wearing the elytra prevented him from using a chest plate, and that lack of armor stung. He gritted his teeth, climbed high until the ground archers couldn't reach him, and scanned the entire battlefield. Orcs and wargs stretched to the horizon. Siege beasts dotted the ridgelines. The scale of the army facing them was enormous. How could 500 elite dwarves and 3,000 elves hold them if not by striking at the head? Azog's position rose on Raven Hill, his command tower, and swarms of bats circled it like a dark cloud. Liyue hesitated. The bats would swallow up any thrown ender pearl, and a firework barrage likely wouldn't break the cloud. Gandalf, he realized, could use a spell to disperse them. He flew back in. "Gandalf, can you drive those bats away?" he called. "Let me see," Gandalf said, squinting up, then teased, "Why don't you drive me away instead?" Liyue rubbed his forehead. Gandalf was merely being his usual proud self. Then a siege beast lunged. Gandalf raised his staff to push it back, but Liyue fired a burning arrow that struck it. The beast reeled and tossed its ram aside. "Good," Gandalf acknowledged. A thunder of rocks and battering rams followed in several directions. Liyue suddenly shoved Bilbo out of the way of a hurled stone. Bilbo froze, bewildered. "Liyue," he called. The boulder flew past. Liyue raised his shield instinctively, but it shattered under the strike. The impact slammed him into the ruins below the wall. He lost a fair amount of health, half the force of Sauron's basic blow, but he was fine. He stood, dusted himself off, and clambered back up to the wall. "May the Valar's blessing protect you," Thranduil half prayed, half exclaimed. Gandalf leaped down. Thorin and Bard followed. Bilbo's heart pounded. If Liyue had not shoved him aside, the Hobbit would have been pancake. Azog, watching from Raven Hill, panicked inwardly. That stone had been intended for Liyue's position. He barked new rules. Never attack Liyue head-on. His attacks carried fire that vanished on contact with water, so always keep water logistics behind the front. Avoid iron gates lying on the ground. They might open to lava pits. Keep infantry at least 100 meters from the wall before a breach. The human crossbowmen would fire short-range explosives. Even a breach wouldn't collapse at once. It would have to be worn down bit by bit. Keep archers ready. The bat swarms must cover Liyue's flight. If you blunt the red lava source, the flows will subside. Some red blocks explode seconds after glowing. Only ogres and other large beasts survive that blast. And finally, Liyue seemed unkillable. Azog's head throbbed. He'd been forced into thinking like a block world engineer. His instincts of brute force and bloodlust were failing. This fight required new thinking. He watched a crowded corner of the wall in silence. This was the toughest battle he'd ever led. Even the great fight against the Durins 100 years ago had been simpler. Yet their forces here were vast, a true field army of Moria, and the Misty Mountains bolstered by war beasts the Dark Lord had supplied. Even so, Liyue and his few thousand defenders were holding firm. Rumble. At last, the bombardment and the siege beasts' desperate attacks created a small breach in the wall. Azog howled and signaled the charge. Orcs flooded in. Finally, this damned wall is broken. They rushed through and met immediate chaos. Iron golems surged. The first ones slammed into the vanguards and sent them flying like leaves. The golems defended the breach fiercely, flipping orcs aside and sealing gaps. The Ologs, 3 hulking, heavily armored brutes, charged to break the line, smashing golems aside at first. But the golems' reinforcements arrived. Soon the Ologs, outnumbered, were swamped and torn apart. Their bodies fell, reinforcement lines crumpled. A war beast stumbled through the breach and bent to enter. Liyue leapt down, drove his sword into its neck, and set it aflame. Thorin's dwarves poured in beside him, cutting, hacking, smashing at heels and toes until the beast faltered and collapsed in seconds. It dropped a dodge skill orb. "Thick skin," Liyue muttered as he kept moving. The Olog's armor made Liyue's hands buzz. Each blow on them was like smacking a living anvil. They had high armor values and solid health. Still, there were only 3 of them. Between Liyue, Thorin, and the iron golems, the orcs' first wave was beaten back. If 100 Ologs had led the vanguard, they might have overrun the golems. Liyue thought of Erebor's mineral reserves. He'd used them all to summon fewer than 1,000 iron golems. The stock was finite, but enough to hold the line if properly employed. The wargs surged from the tunnels, another wave Azog had been holding back. Liyue slammed blocks at the breach, sweat beading on his forehead. The pressure was enormous. He He glanced at Gandalf, who cut down the last orcs inside the wall. "These battles," Gandalf said while swinging his staff, "they just keep changing." "I've decided to respect the mechanics," Leeway said, oddly calm. "Thanks to the readers who supported the chapter. Returns of fortune, votes, and rewards were appreciated. Today's extra chapter reached 10,000 characters. This part will try to reach an ending as quickly as possible." Chapter 89, Taking the Initiative. It felt like trying to beat a dungeon by ignoring its mechanics and relying only on stats that outclassed the version's intended challenge. That was Leeway's approach, crushing the problem with sheer superiority. Going head-to-head with the Audiobook army when the numbers were so lopsided was overwhelming. Only Leeway in this whole world would dare to play like that. From behind the walls, they could hold. They could outlast the orcs by wearing them down. The city had been provisioned for a long siege. Food and water were not the limiting factors. If anyone would break first, it would be the attackers. But a campaign lasting months or more than a year would be intolerable, and Leeway worried about unforeseen complications if they dragged it out. The unexpected had already started. From the wall, he watched the orc engineers building huge siege ladders and sighed. "I always feel like the difficulty of this battle is changing," he said. "What do you mean?" Gandalf asked after cutting down another orc with a single, precise stroke. He joined Leeway on the parapet. "It means this can't go on as it is," Leeway answered. The dwarves had returned from clearing the inner lines, and the leaders gathered above the main gate. During the pause, Leeway pointed toward the rear of the Audiobook army. "They're building something different back there." Thorin squinted. "Siege ladders." Thranduil added, "Those orcs have an uncanny talent for crafting instruments of war and torment." "They were bred for it," Bard muttered. "For climbing? They can't get up them from here," Bard said, indicating the defensive positions. "If one ladder comes close, our firework crossbow teams can blow it apart." "That's true, but the orcs are nearly endless. How many times can your crossbows fire?" Gandalf asked. They all looked toward Thorin. "Our gunpowder reserves were never extensive," he admitted. Leeway's reputation for extracting resources from the Lonely Mountain had faded into a caution. They no longer assumed limitless supplies. In an age where firearms were rare and explosives unheard of, powder was not stockpiled. What they had in the flash bomb workshop was effectively the mountain's total. It was more than they'd expected, but not inexhaustible. "What's the plan?" Gandalf asked Leeway. "Decapitation," Leeway said simply. Orcs were chaotic. Without a leader to bind them, they could turn on one another. After being weathered by a long defense, a direct strike at command might break them. But getting to the command platform was hard. Bats patrolled the sky, and archers ringed the platform. Flying in with an elytra was unrealistic. A frontal push would face tens of thousands of orcs. Digging underneath was possible in theory. Dig past the landworms and then strike from below. But the distance and the mountain's thickness meant long work, and there was no guarantee of precise direction without a map. "We can cover you," Dine interrupted, pointing down toward the valley. "See those chariots? Their battlefield cuts will exceed your expectations. Nothing, save the giant beasts, will stop them." "Most of the giant beasts are gone," Leeway remarked. "Many had been expended during the siege. My men can cover you to the ruins at the mountain's base. From there, I believe you can handle the rest." Dine had seen Leeway's sweeping, impervious armor and knew he was right. The Lord of the Iron Hills and his hammer believed in Leeway's ability. That convinced the gathered dwarves. "Let me come," Thorin said abruptly. He would never pass up a chance to strike Azog, even at the risk of his life. Together, Killy and Philly chimed, exchanging glances before volunteering immediately. "We can drive the chariots," one of Dine's champions added. The dwarven expeditionary force stepped forward as one. Having proven themselves in countless skirmishes, they were the mountain's elite, competent, grim, ready. Balin smiled wryly. "I may be old, but my aim is not yet rusted. I won't waste a single bolt." Leeway nodded. The plan now made sense. Thranduil, Bard, Dine, and Gandalf would hold and provide cover. Leeway, Thorin, the expeditionary dwarves, and a team of dwarf battlefield cutters would make the active strike, aiming to sever the head of the orcs' command. Just as preparations were finishing, crossbow bolts checked, levers set, a small voice came from behind them. "And me," Bilbo spoke up. Thorin chuckled, then stepped off his chariot and went to Bilbo. "Master Baggins, this is no place for you," he said in an oddly solemn tone. "As a hobbit, your place is a warm armchair by an afternoon garden, not a battlefield where life is lost in a heartbeat." Bilbo opened his mouth, flustered. "Aye, we will meet again," Thorin continued, intent on keeping helplessness at bay. "I can help, honestly." Bilbo protested and tried to follow, but Gandalf restrained him with a look that balanced pity and sternness. "Bilbo, I have never doubted your courage, but do you know what lies outside these walls?" Gandalf asked softly. "War, blood, death. You have done your part. Stay here and trust your friends." Gandalf then pointed to a nearby human soldier who looked distinctly nervous. "You, take good care of this hobbit. Don't let him go." The soldier nearly tripped running forward, eyes downcast as if embarrassed to be seen. Gandalf didn't care for theatrics. He simply gave the instruction and returned to the parapet, frowning up at the sky as if counting the patrols of bats. The brief interlude passed. At the gate, the chariots waited in the rear. Soldiers on the wall gripped the release levers and watched the field. "Sons of Durin," Thorin roared, drawing his sword. "Charge with me!" A massive lever clanged, the gate fell, and 5 assault chariots thundered out in succession, each a gleaming, menacing bulk bristling with armor-piercing automatic crossbows. These weapons had been withheld during the defense. Now they would be used. Behind the chariots came the dwarven goat riders, heavy-footed and ferocious. Every rider was handpicked by Dane, veterans with the most blood on their shields and the hardest horned steeds. "Surround them!" Azog bellowed on the other side. The orc commander saw his army threatened by this sortie and could not understand the gall of those who would ride out of the safety of their walls. How dare they march to their deaths with so many of his troops arrayed below? The battlefield held its breath as the two forces closed, engines of iron and horn rushing toward the heart of the enemy. Chapter 90. Unexpected Support. Under Azog's command, the orcs in the front rank lifted their shields and leveled their long spears at the oncoming chariots and riders, trying to form an unbroken wall. But the dwarves' equipment and Li Wei's tactics went beyond anything the orcs had imagined. Whoosh! Firework bolts from the crossbows screamed out, punching a small hole in the orc formation. Each bolt carried 7 firework stars. The explosions ripped through armor, dealt heavy damage, and flipped shields out of several orcs' hands. Immediately after came the dwarven goat cavalry. The goats' great, curved horns were like living shields. Unlike horse cavalry, a goat that charged straight into spears often left the spearmen worse off. These were the same riders who could crack an elven shield line. The flimsier orcs had no chance. With a thunderous crash, the goat cavalry slammed into the line, sending orcs flying and tumbling. Behind them, 5 chariots harnessed to large-horned goats smashed into formation in succession. The lead goats dropped their heads and rammed the front rank, knocking entire rows flat. The chariot wheels thundered over fallen bodies, the rotating alloy blades mounted on their rims slicing through orcs' armor and flesh with brutal efficiency. The infantry line split clean in two, leaving a wide, bloody corridor as the chariots cut through. Li Wei glanced back at the grinding device whirring on the chariot's rear wheel and thought in silence. If that thing caught him, it would take a huge chunk of his health. It was the raw, deadly power of technology. Touch it and fly, get hit and die. Under the onslaught of dwarf cavalry and cutting chariots, the vanguard sent to block them was routed. Many orcs were trampled to death. Bodies littered the ground. The formation had collapsed. 5 slicing chariots had literally dismembered the infantry that stood against them. "Beasts!" Azog barked. Special troops were needed to counter special weapons. Those chariots were terrifying to infantry, but a proper beast could turn them over with a single blow. "Our beasts have taken heavy losses," Bolg warned from Azog's side. During the siege, most of the thick-skinned largest beasts had already died trying to counter Li Wei's innovations. "Only some ogres remain," he added. "No Ologs left. Then send them at once," Azog ordered. The front ranks scattered to create a path. Compared to the great beasts, ogres were weaker, but they still had the strength to stop chariots, if they could get a chance. Whoosh! Li Wei loosed a burning arrow that struck the foremost ogre. The creature was suddenly alight. The flames wouldn't go out, even as it rolled on the ground. If a target wasn't fire immune, it simply had to burn for a few seconds. The orcs hurried to douse the blaze, but Li Wei and the dwarves were relentless. Between Li Wei's fire arrows and the chariot's armor-piercing automatic crossbows, capable of rotating and changing fire direction, the ogres had little hope. Thick steel bolts hammered into them. Li Wei's arrows punctured their hide and lodged in their bodies. Under the covering fire of 5 automatic crossbows, the ogres were cut down before they reached the chariots. "Damn it!" Azog spat as he watched the assault sweep forward. He realized what Li Wei and the dwarves were doing. Had even one beast or a single olog been left to send in, they could have smashed the chariots. But the beasts and ologs had been thrown at the city earlier. After the walls were breached, the few remaining had been sent in as vanguards. They never came back. Now, aside from some catapult beasts at the flanks, creatures used for siege work, not frontline combat, there were no heavy units left. "We cannot let the great enemy reach us," Azog snarled. "Send the wargs!" A flag was raised, and wargs surged in from both flanks. Fragile compared to ogres, one well-placed bolt could take one down. The wargs' strength lay in numbers and speed. They were also the natural nemesis of goats. Once the wolves closed, the goat teams would break, and the chariots would be stranded. "Prepare to engage," Thorin called, climbing to the front of a chariot. They would have to dismount and fight soon. Balin manned an automatic crossbow, spinning its aim to pour fire into the swarm of wargs. He glanced back at Li Wei. "Any ideas?" "Like that magic storm Gandalf used in Orktown. Wishful thinking," Li Wei said, shaking his head. "Don't count on Gandalf. Prepare to dismount and fight. We're not far from our goal. We can force our way through. Once we reach the base of the ruined watchtower, we'll hold the line and block them." "All right," Thorin said. "A little more time, that's all." Li Wei drew his longsword and watched the approaching warg pack, ready to spring. The chariot's fire was beginning to wane as the wargs closed in and the goats neared collision, but then piercing cries split the air. Above, 7 or 8 great eagles banked and dove. Their razor-sharp talons shredded a swath through the leading wargs. From one eagle, a tall figure leapt, and at the moment of landing, he changed into a massive bear and charged into the ranks, plowing into the wolf pack to clear a path for the chariots, Bjorn the skin changer. Li Wei and Balin looked at each other in stunned amusement. "You called it, Li Wei. Reinforcements," Balin exclaimed. "Divine reinforcements?" Thorin laughed from the chariot. "I only said it in passing." From another eagle, Radagast the Brown waved cheerfully, leaning forward to wave his staff at Li Wei. "I brought help. We're not too late, are we?" "You're just in time," Li Wei waved back, triumphant. The barb was aimed squarely at Gandalf. Now Radagast finally had a chance to shine. The great eagles dropped Li Wei and the dwarves at the foot of Raven Hill, then cried out and swooped at the orc army. Bjorn tore through the wargs with brutal force. Azog, enraged at the bear's arrogance, threw a small squad at him to surround and take him down. A single skin changer was powerful, but not invincible. Bjorn's initial charge cost him stamina, and the great eagles soon found themselves harried by a fresh problem. From the burrows along the battlefield, a group of ogres surfaced. Their rock-like hides scraped at the eagles' talons. Their heavy clubs swung and knocked at the birds. It wasn't a decisive threat, but it was enough trouble. "I say we pull back for now. I saw Gandalf on the wall," Radagast told the great eagles. With a few cries, the eagles lifted, carrying Radagast and the exhausted Bjorn toward the city wall, leaving a chaotic spread of orcs and a clutch of frustrated ogres behind them. When the aerial reinforcements departed, the orcs turned their attention back to the ruins beneath Raven Hill, hunting for Li Wei and the dwarves. But where they expected only rubble and open ground, a wall had suddenly appeared, an outcrop of stone rising where nothing had stood before. It was made of the same unyielding material as the city wall, impenetrable, and now blocking the orcs' path. Chapter 91, Strange Silence. The great eagles were powerful, and Bjorn the bear was no weakling either, but there were only 7 or 8 of them. Orc reinforcements, by contrast, seemed endless. The Aoke army from Gundabad kept pouring onto the field without stopping. The orcs were experienced at hunting skin changers. They knew the great bear's vulnerabilities and could aim for them. If they were willing to accept losses, they could bring him down. Compared to a certain great enemy who had appeared recently, these were manageable losses. And those great eagles, impressive as they were, couldn't possibly fight 10,000 foes at once. If not for Li Wei's preemptive work clearing out the orc warbeasts, the eagles might never have swept through the warg packs so effectively. Human strength has limits, Li Wei's did not. Go, go, go! At the foot of Raven Hill, Li Wei led the charge, the dwarves at his back, Asmar clearing the ambushes. The path behind them had been blocked, but while the orcs were still reeling from the eagles' strikes, Li Wei seized the chance to cut off the route to the enemy's command platform, sealing the Aoke army outside the wall. Orcs outside couldn't get inside, and those inside couldn't get out. Battle connectivity was severed, and the field fragmented into smaller pockets. That didn't mean the orcs stopped fighting. Orcs hiding in the ruins poured out, scimitars and crossbows raised. Most of these were pit orcs from the deep halls of Moria, darker and meaner than the Misty Mountain breeds. Li Wei led the counter. Shield up, he banged away incoming bolts, drew his longsword and charged, cleaving through the horde. He cut from the ruin's southern edge to the north, then realized he'd gone too far and swung back. After plowing back and forth, he terrified those long-tunneled orcs into a rout. A new skill orb dropped. Armor Break. Li Wei learned it instantly and raised it to level 1. Armor Break, as the name implied, allowed the next strike, after a brief charge, to ignore the target's armor and deal direct damage. No attacks could be made during the roughly 1-second charge. The way up is over here! Thorin pulled him back before Li Wei could make another circuit and pointed toward the stairs. Thorin had gone conservative, for once. Good sense, Li Wei thought. The lowest layer of orcs had mostly been cleared. The remaining scattered groups could be left to the dwarves' cut-through teams. They climbed the stairs without pause. Orc, warg, or obstacle, Li Wei dealt with it. Some orcs tried collapsing the path or piling debris to block them, but stones were pried open and barriers chopped down in a few swings. It was almost laughable, small parties trying to stop someone who played with different rules. An arrow hissed past, and Li Wei glanced up. A cluster of small, wiry creatures skittered from rocks by the roadside. Goblins. Even goblins from Orktown had come to the field. "Ha, you're surrounded," one of the goblins screamed. While everyone's attention turned, another group of goblins shrieked and leapt from above, scimitars and cudgels raised for an aerial strike. They froze mid-jump when they saw who waited below. "No, it's that one began, but a single clean slash cut the leader in midair, and he fell, burning where he struck the ground. Seeing the black-armored warrior's face, the goblins realized their mistake. Retreat, some tried, but it was too late. By the time the dust settled, over 100 goblins lay dead along the path, most scorched, a few cut down by blade. Another skill orb, Leap Slash, fell. Li Wei learned it immediately. Leap Slash, lock on, leap, and strike on landing to deal area damage and briefly apply a weakness debuff to affected enemies. Keep moving, Li Wei urged and led them on. Strangely, however, they met no further resistance. Where did the orcs go? Killy wondered, surprised. They weren't scared off, were they? Feely answered first. Thorin shook his head. No, it's not that simple. Stay alert. Watch your surroundings. They climbed to the top of Raven Hill. No more orcs. No swarms of bats overhead. No archers encircling the command platform. The only thing left was the combined command flag, standing alone. The place felt wrong, eerily quiet. "I've got a bad feeling about this," Dwalin said, the unease clear in his voice. "It's like 100 eyes are watching us, and we can't see a single one." He tightened his grip on his axe. "We'll know once we go up." Li Wei didn't look worried. "That's the command platform." He stepped forward slowly. The silence pressed on. No roar of bats, no shouts, nothing. Then a faint click drew their gaze. The command horn blew by itself. A flag signal snapped into place. A column of orc soldiers in front of the city wall advanced on command and were instantly cut down by defending archers and the firework crossbow teams on the wall. "Huh?" Thorin and the others looked at Li Wei. "What are you doing?" "Shh, I'm doing research," Li Wei said. Click, click, click. The sound of mechanisms reset, flags snapped, and horns blew again and again. From above, the Aoka army was a mad, loose collection of movements. Some columns veered left, some right, Some advanced into a wall of arrows and were annihilated. Some retreated only to crash into formations behind them. The battlefield dissolved into controlled chaos. Wargs eased out of tunnels with mouths open, looking around like lost dogs. Ogres loped from caves and charged left, only to run into a rock face and stand there scratching their heads, utterly confused. What had seemed like an empty, eerie command platform was actually a mechanical command center with preset signals, sending troops like clockwork into traps. The Pale Orc's cunning had extended beyond brute force into gears and timing. The result was glorious mayhem. Fun, Li Wei said, watching the controlled confusion spread. Chapter 92, Change of Situation. Inside the city, the great eagles found places to perch among the ruined rooftops of the river valley. Radagast and Bjorn dismounted and hurried toward Gandalf. "You've arrived," Gandalf greeted them, then tipped his hat to the eagles. "It seems I haven't come too late." "Perfect timing," Radagast said, "and Bjorn as well." Gandalf led them out onto the city wall and stared at the stone barrier Li Wei had erected at the foot of the distant mountain. "Our plan has run into difficulties, and you came at just the right moment." "Good," Bjorn rumbled, "but the situation still looks grim." Although Li Wei and the others had reached Raven Hill, the Oke army outside the wall had not been thinned. If anything, their attacks continued unabated. Catapults still hurled great stones through the air. An ordinary wall would have been smashed to pieces by now. "Trust Li Wei," Bjorn said. "He'll handle it." "That human," Bjorn muttered. "My wild instincts tell me, if I were his enemy, I'd run." "Maybe he is trustworthy," Radagast agreed, then brightened as if recalling something. "Ah, Gandalf, I saw another column of the Aoke army moving down from the northern mountain toward Raven Hill. They're heading for another entrance at the summit." "Not good," Gandalf frowned. Thorin and the others could be in real danger. "What about Li Wei?" "He's all right," Gandalf answered, but added quietly, "he may not be able to watch over every one of them." They were still talking when a deep blast of horn cut through the clamor. Another orc command sounded as a column advanced on the left. Gandalf squinted. "Fire!" The defenders on the wall would not miss the opening. Arrows and rockets rained down. The approaching unit vanished in a hail of shot. Again the horn sounded, and another orc formation tried to advance. This one faltered and retreated, stumbling into those behind them. Wargs surged forward and then skidded to a halt on a battlefield suddenly without clear foes. Ogre squads smashed into walls. Supplies and lines of march twisted and ground to a halt. Chaos rippled through the enemy ranks. "What on earth are they doing?" Everyone on the wall murmured in confusion. "And where's the Hobbit who was with us?" someone added. Bilbo had been on watch until he wasn't. Bjorn looked around and then frowned. "Bilbo." Gandalf's face tightened. He strode to the soldier he had left in charge of watching the Hobbit. The man lowered his head and pointed toward the city streets. "Over there, just a moment ago." "Where?" Gandalf demanded. Before the soldier could answer, Bard hurried up, noticing the commotion. He seized the man by the shoulders and forced him to look up. The soldier's eyes were rimmed with dark bruises. Bard stared, startled. "Alfred?" Alfred swallowed. "My lord, I'm sorry. I don't know. He left a short while ago." Gandalf, feeling a headache build, spun away and ran to the edge of the wall. He shouted down over the tumult, "You foolish fellow, get back here!" But his cry was lost in the clamor of battle. Bilbo had vanished without a trace. Halfway up the mountain, where no one had thought to look, two lithe figures were picking their way over jagged rocks, climbing faster than any mule could carry them. "We need to hurry, Toriel," Legolas said, springing from ledge to ledge. "I didn't expect the Aoke army to arrive so soon. We're a step behind." "I hope they're all right," Toriel answered, quickening her pace. She clutched a small object a certain dwarf had pressed into her hand, and it steadied her. Elves are sensitive to the currents of feeling. Legolas watched the change in Toriel but kept silent. To him, she was a trusted comrade, someone to watch his back, closer perhaps than a friend, but not something he named. When Thranduil had ordered Toriel's banishment, Legolas had chosen to follow her. He had watched in quiet sympathy as she fell into an emotional whirlpool, perhaps love, something he had little reason to understand, and, in his own way, had supported her. Halfway up, Legolas bent suddenly and snatched the claw of a large bat as it skimmed by, launching himself into the air and hauling the creature upward. Toriel, surprised for only a heartbeat, caught another bat and followed. Only elves could ride like that. Any other race would have been dashed against the rocks. They soared to the crown of Raven Hill, found a narrow ledge to land on, and once set down, Legolas drew a dagger, dealt the bat a swift stroke, and ended its flight. The orc horn blared, flags were raised. "They're beginning the assault," someone called. Toriel looked in the direction of the signal. There's their command platform," she said, pointing. Legolas stepped forward, drew his longbow, and peered. He wanted to see who was directing the army. "I see it," he whispered. "Who's there?" "It's Li Wei." Legolas's eyes widened. On the mountain below, Li Wei was frantically operating the mechanism on the makeshift platform, feverishly signaling with flags as if conducting an orchestra of war. He was making a show of it, perhaps to bait a leader into revealing himself. A roar split the air from behind a ruined tower. Azog could not be kept back any longer. He bounded forward and strode to the front. Behind him, a tide of Gundabad orcs poured into view, advancing in tight formations over rubble and wreckage until they flanked Azog on both sides. The Oka army seemed endless, packed shoulder to shoulder, their files spilling from another route to the north. In a short while, the entire mountain had been occupied, no gaps, no weak points. This force gave Azog the boldness to confront Li Wei openly. If these reinforcements had not arrived, he might have still held back. Now he strode forward with a grin and lifted the cleaver in his hand toward Li Wei. "Now let's see what you're really capable of," Azog snarled. Thorin tightened his fingers around his sword and spoke low to the dwarves behind him, stealing them. Before stepping forward, he caught Li Wei's eye. "Li Wei," he said, voice raw with resolve, "if I do not return, tell Bilbo that he is a courageous warrior and a friend I am proud to have." Li Wei snorted. "You never told him that before. You were the first to forbid him from joining the fight." Thorin shook his head, saying no more. Li Wei grinned. "My suggestion is, tell him yourself." "I'm not your messenger," Thorin replied. Chapter 93. Nemesis. Kill. Azog roared. The orcs switched from offense to defense in an instant. Flashbangs flew, bright detonations that forced the front ranks to shut their eyes and halt. A few seconds later, when their vision returned, a solid wall had suddenly risen before them, bottlenecking the already narrow approach. "It's him again!" Azog had seen this trick before. The sudden spawning of blocks was the attacker's signature. But knowing the tactic didn't mean he couldn't prepare. "Bring the ladders." Pre-assembled ladders were dragged up and propped against the low wall. Orcs clambered up, trying to press through. Then a figure dropped down from the top, heavy black armor, a gleaming longsword. He landed and leapt into a jump attack. A wave of impact hit as if a single stroke struck dozens at once. Those orcs staggered as if their bodies had been unplugged, strength draining away. A few sweeping slashes opened a wide, bloodied gap. Azog's breath caught. He took a step back. In other times, seeing a lone human like this, he might have called for a duel to kill him and rally his troops. Now he had no such vanity. He ordered the army, "Hold him. Bolg, take a detachment and go around to the rear. Kill the dwarves." As Bolg led a squad to find a detour, Azog watched the human. The man, whose presence had become an image in his mind, pulled several small vials and gulped them down. Strength 2, speed 2, regeneration 2. The orcs at the very front felt a sudden tightening in their chests, a heaviness pressing down on them. The human swung his sword in a broad arc. Everything in its path was sent flying and erupted into flame. Dozens died in a single terrible stroke. The blade felt less like steel and more like a blunt battering ram. When it struck a shield, it didn't glance. It shoved, crushing shield and man together. Azog kept retreating, sending waves of troops forward. It was uncanny. Besides the obvious surge in strength, the human's speed was inhuman. A wizard's potion, he realized aloud. Potions could explain the change. Tens of thousands of orcs surged to encircle him. From Azog's vantage, it was futile. The man either swung relentlessly or suddenly leaped and came down like an invisible strike. Each attack cut down swathes of orcs. They could not pin him down. When they did land blows, the damage was negligible. Sometimes he would dodge in a blink, as if teleporting, and the attack missed entirely. Thud, thud, heavy ogre steps approached. Azog shoved them forward to help close the ring. Boom! An explosion ripped through the encirclement above. Screams. Orcs were torn apart, limbs flew. Ogres raised their arms to block and were knocked back. Yet when Azog looked at the human, all he could see was a man with a broad wooden shield that had held against the blast. The thought flashed absurdly through his mind. Was this man another oaken shield? Send the ogres to the front. Surround him. Azog barked. The ogres raised massive clubs and surged. A flashbang detonated at point-blank range, leaving the ogres blinking and swinging blindly. From the ring, a smooth pearl flew out and landed at Azog's feet. He stared at it. What? The pearl shimmered, purple motes drifted, and a spectral figure materialized, slashing with an invisible sword. Azog barely blocked with a modified weapon on his left forearm, but the force shoved him backward. Click, hiss, the figure placed and ignited several TNT blocks. The human lifted his shield. Azog rolled aside instinctively, but still felt the afterblast shove him several meters. Stop him, he bellowed. Even wounded, the pale orc charged with ogres. He had earned his title. Brave, perhaps reckless, but dangerous. An ogre's club, half a man wide, crashed down. The human met it with his sword, parried, and sent the blow aside. Azog found himself retreating. The man tossed another pearl, teleporting to Azog's side and bringing his blade down. Azog raised his shield and strained. The impact scraped him backward across the ground. A short chuckle escaped the human. From above, a watchtower collapsed. Hidden ogres heaved stones down. The rubble thundered and slammed into the man, throwing up a cloud of dust. The orc leader had learned to use the environment. He had forced the human into a trap. But the debris was dug away. The man stood unharmed. Those falling stones were no match for the blows of a siege beast, and he had taken it in stride. Ah! Ah! Azog roared and lunged, warhammer raised. They collided, hammer against sword and shield. Again and again, Azog pressed forward, but each time the human forced him back. Then Azog found an opening. He brought the warhammer down onto the human's breastplate with a ring of sparks. The blow should have broken him, yet the man did not step back. Azog looked up and saw the human's face, half smiling. "Why aren't you dead yet?" he snarled. "This is fate, Azog." Whoosh! Blood sprayed. The pale leader's body convulsed and fell to the ground. Flames licked his form. Azog rolled, struggled, and writhed. He could not escape the final burn. Unwillingness filled his dying eyes. He collapsed, charred and still. Azog, the pale orc leader, lay fallen. At once, the surrounding ranks dissolved into chaos. Orcs scattered and fled as the human's gaze swept the field. The ogres hesitated, scratched their heads in bewilderment, and then, like wild dogs who had lost their alpha, they suddenly fixed on the fleeing orcs and let out frenzied shrieks as they gave chase. A new prompt blinked into existence above the battlefield. Misty Mountains Orc Reputation, 558 and 73, Great Enemy, Title Acquired, Orc Nemesis. Since the beginning of the Third Age, only one figure among the Free Peoples had been termed a Great Enemy, Sauron. The label Nemesis had been even rarer. The Balrog beneath Moria, the destroyer of dwarven halls and slayer of kings, was called Durin's Nemesis. In the First Age, Balrogs had slain many elves who dubbed them Elf Nemesis. Even artifacts could be called nemeses. The One Ring had been known as Isildur's Nemesis. A nemesis heralded death, ruin, and dread. To bear the title was to be feared. And now, here on this battlefield, a new great enemy and nemesis had been forged, one who had struck real slaughter and won a fearsome reputation among friend and foe alike. Chapter 94. Consecutive Kills. Humph! Thorin swung his sword with everything he had and severed the orc's head from its shoulders. The dwarves formed a tight ring around him, holding back the press of orcs that kept surging forward. "Fall back! The chariot guard is that way. We'll link up with them and break through." "There's no time, Thorin. They're pressing us from the other side." Dwalin scanned the crowd with a nervous grimace. Both the path ahead and the way behind were clogged with orcs. Escape looked impossible. Above them, unnoticed, Bolg quietly drew a bow and took careful aim at the king on the ground. Whoosh! A faint gust cut the air. Thorin glanced up just in time to hear a dagger clang against the incoming arrow, skidding it aside. From the tower, an elf's voice came. "Your life is spared, dwarf." Legolas stood on the ruined parapet, bow in hand. Thorin picked up the dagger that had deflected the bolt and, with a wry gesture, hurled it toward the tower. Pft! The blade grazed Legolas's hair and then drove through the neck of an orc, pressing him from behind. Legolas unclipped the dagger and, leaving it there, leapt down to the fray. The orcs attacked harder. Even with Dwalin's clan's best warriors and their brave king present, they were badly outnumbered. Stamina drained with every exchange. The orcs only swelled in number. Killy, the youngest dwarf, faltered first. An orc knocked his sword from his grasp. Its cleaver arced down to finish him. "Get down!" A long knife flashed as it buried itself in the orc's ribs. Killy snatched it free and looked up. Toriel. Toriel swooped in, twin daggers at her hips, and plunged into the gaps in the line. Her fierce, precise fighting style eased the pressure on the dwarves and inspired them to press on. Dwalin roared and brought his axe down. "I won't be outdone by an elf." "Where's their leader?" Thorin wondered out loud. It nagged at him. The enemy commander had vanished after the ambush. On the tower's second level, Legolas watched Toriel join the fight and prepared to descend when a heavy cleaver swung at his head, stopping him. Bolg had climbed the ruined stair and trapped Legolas on that floor. Up close, Legolas saw the orc was no shorter than he was and far more heavily built. Truly a giant among orc kind. The size alone didn't intimidate the elf. If anything, it fired him up. After a few sharp exchanges, Legolas found an opening and thrust a dagger through Bolg's palm. Any other orc might have howled and hit the deck. Bolg only tightened his fist, wrenched the dagger free, seized Legolas, slammed him down, and then hurled him off the tower with monstrous strength. Most would have died from that fall. Legolas caught at a jagged ledge on his way down and stopped himself, then hauled himself back up, breathless. Blood stained the corner of his mouth. Fury rose in him. He scrambled back to the tower, but Bolg was gone. Hold! Thorin still fought at the bottleneck. If they kept formation, they might hold. Then the orcs at the intersection split, and an ogre burst through, swinging a tree trunk club. Thorin rolled under the blow and scrambled clear, but the dodge broke their rhythm. Orcs swarmed and pinned him. Another club came down. A stone thudded off the ogre's skull. "Hey, big guy!" "Bilbo!" Thorin's eyes widened. "How could you?" Bilbo, far braver than his size suggested, nodded and slung another stone with all his might. "Stupid, over here." The ogre reared and charged the little figure, smashing rock after rock where the Hobbit had been. Bilbo darted between boulders and ducked behind a crag. The brute smashed the rock to splinters and found emptiness. Just as it wheeled, splat, another stone hit. Bilbo had slipped away and reappeared ahead, drawing the brutish creature after him. The ogre, furious, climbed the rock face in hot pursuit. Bilbo evaded and vanished again. At the same time, Bolg descended from the tower and strode toward Thorin. He pulled the dagger free from an Orcish corpse and flung it with terrible aim. Ugh! The blade pierced Thorin's hand. He gritted his teeth, wrenched it out, and with one bleeding hand killed 2 orcs that surged forward. He met Bolg's stare. "Is this the king of Dwalin's clan? Weaker than I expected. Try me and find out." Though drained from earlier battles and wounded by the quick strike, Thorin forced himself upright. "There are reserves in every desperate man," he told himself. Whoosh! An arrow came in. Bolg dodged and crushed it beneath his boot. He threw a snarl and called upward. "Ha! Elves, both of you, come down and fight me!" Legolas could not stand the insult. He leapt from the high ground, kicked the dagger Thorin had dropped back into his hand, and joined the dwarves and the elf in a hard line against Bolg. They clashed, blades singing. Footfalls thundered from behind. A squad of ogres shoved aside lesser orcs and poured forward. Bolg's grin widened. "Perfect timing. Get them for me." The ogres raced past him, as if drawn by a different command. Bolg blinked, furious. Then more orcs followed, but they ran not toward battle but away, fleeing from something unseen. Dwarves and elves muddled together, catching their breath. "They're afraid," someone observed. "Afraid of what?" someone else asked. Bolg seized a passing orc and hauled it in by the throat. The creature choked out the words. Great enemy, nemesis." "What enemy? What nemesis?" A shriek cut the air. Several orcs dropped from above, falling in a shower of flame and landing motionless. Bolg's eyes widened. When the dark figure appeared, something primal ran through him. His pulse leapt, his limbs tingled, and a reflexive, savage energy rose up. He restrained the urge to flee and let out a howl as he charged, cleaver swinging in a red arc. "Here you are." The voice was calm. Bolg met the blade with another blade, but the attacker refused a drawn-out duel. He parried, stepped back a shadow's breadth, and gathered himself. Bolg rushed in again, cleaver descending with the force of a battering ram. Crack! A flash of steel shattered the cleaver and tore through the orc's armor to the flesh beneath. The weapon in Bolg's hand splintered. Fire leapt along his body as if conjured from the wound. He screamed and crumpled, helpless for the first time in his life. The orc deputy's defiant toughness could not save him from that strike or the flames it brought. Bolg fell still. The battlefield fell quieter for an instant as one of the orc's greatest bulwarks lay dead. Chapter 95, After the War. The horn blared, but this time no flag signals followed. Li Wei strode to the edge of the command platform and shouted down at the orcs massed below the mountain. "Your leader is dead. Now run for your lives, you scum!" With a wet thud, 2 severed heads were flung from the platform, tumbling and bouncing down the steep slope before sprawling among the fleeing orcs. "I am your nemesis," Li Wei called, voice cold. The sight of their leaders' heads sent a shock through the ranks. The orcs immediately panicked. Formation collapsed into chaos. Even the orc chieftain, charged with holding their lines, lost his nerve. Unable to look at the fallen heads or up at the figure on the platform, he fled like the rest. The battlefield dissolved into disorder. "Looks like it's over." Bard breathed a sigh that sounded almost like relief, as if a peaceful life might finally be possible. "Ha ha! They did it!" The dwarves erupted into cheers, embracing one another. Dain spread his arms in triumph, then, seeing Thranduil nearby, redirected to hug Gandalf instead. Thranduil, impassive, only said, "A victory worth celebrating." Gandalf smiled. "Against nearly 10 times our numbers and with almost no losses, it's like a dream. This is all thanks to our ally." "Li Wei," Thranduil added softly, looking up toward the mountain where Li Wei had stood. He had begun, privately, to regard Li Wei as an ally of note. "Time to finish the rout, lads," Dain ordered, rallying his forces. After a brief celebration, the dwarves fell back into battle discipline to sweep up the scattered orcs. Thranduil likewise composed himself and barked, "Prepare for battle." "Let's go," Gandalf said, drawing his sword. Radagast the Brown shook his head. "Oh, you go. I'm not good at this sort of thing." "I'll go," Bjorn roared. He leapt from the wall, shifting into a giant bear, and charged into the chaotic orc ranks. No one could count how many orcs fell in that onslaught, but the fiercest killer on the field was indisputably Li Wei. He drove the orcs from Gundabad down Raven Hill and onward. Once on the battlefield, he moved like a wolf through a flock. Where he appeared, orcs fled as if repelled by a magnet. The sight was terrifying and spectacular. During the cleanup, at least 1,000 orcs fell directly to Li Wei's blade, and skill orbs rained down everywhere. Even after the orc leaders had ordered a full retreat and their forces had fled, Li Wei continued the pursuit, switching to his elytra when he couldn't close the distance, landing and cutting down any stragglers. "Isn't this a bit too brutal?" Gandalf remarked quietly. Thranduil looked at him. "When have you ever shown mercy to your enemies, Gandalf?" "No, I don't pity them. I only think it's unnecessary." "Nothing is unnecessary," Thranduil replied calmly. In the older, harsher ages of elves and men, it was not unheard of for a single lord to slaughter hundreds or thousands of orcs and take a leader's head. Such feats were now rare in Middle-earth, and those who could still do them were few. Li Wei counted among them. But combat prowess was not his only strength. He had other talents that set him apart. "All done," Li Wei said, picking up another skill orb and turning to leave. The orc survivors screamed and scattered into the forest, doubtless too shaken to return anytime soon. After this battle, he had obtained at least one of every skill orb. His basic swordsmanship had reached its maximum. Armor break, thrust, dodge, block, jump slash, spin attack, blade storm, backstab, sword key, 14 skills filled his combat manual. Li Wei swung his blade idly, and a pale white sword chi sliced through the air and dissipated 17 meters away. It was a level 1 sword chi, short range, modest power, only 3 or 4 points of damage and no burn effect, but perfect for clearing brush. With long enough combos, though, its damage could climb. With 7 or more hits, a single sword chi could reach 10 points. Fireworks boomed overhead again, and the orcs in the trees shivered, but no pursuers landed. Li Wei ended the chase and returned to the lonely mountain. Inside Dale, People had lowered their guard and begun to settle, sharing cups and small talk. Elves sat with practiced composure, occasionally clinking goblets of strong liquor. A dwarf watched an elf drink the liquor unchanged. He suspected the elf was only pretending to be unaffected. Clang. The city gate rose, and the dwarves cheered anew. "Welcome, welcome back to your king," they cried, as Dine strode forward to embrace Thorin. The others gathered around, celebrating heartily. "We are proud of you, Thorin," someone called. Thorin accepted the praise with a tired nod. "Thank you, Dine, but the glory is not mine alone. It belongs to all of us, especially." He gestured, and Bilbo stepped forward from behind him. "Our master burglar," Thorin finished, pushing Bilbo into the open. Bilbo smiled awkwardly, suddenly the center of attention. He wasn't sure where to put his hands, but the praise swelled his chest. "You deserve this, Bilbo. You saved our lives many times and helped find the Arkenstone," one dwarf told him. Gandalf, Radagast, Beorn, and the Eagle King watched the returning company with warm approval. The dwarves celebrated with gusto, and the men of Dale gathered to applaud. The elves, by contrast, remained distant and reserved. They stood neatly at the gate, but said little. Only Thranduil offered a formal remark. "Congratulations on reclaiming your homeland. I sincerely hope this land regains its vitality," he said. Thorin inclined his head. "I hope the king of the woodland realm has not forgotten our discussion." "I will go," Thranduil replied, his tone cool and inscrutable. As they spoke, a firework burst overhead, and a louder cheer rose from the city gate, filling the night with sound. Chapter 96, The Feast. "Raise a toast to our hero." The dwarves were the first to make a ruckus, Dine foremost among them. In less formal moments, this lord could be positively boisterous. Close behind the dwarves came the men of Long Lake. Bard, whose brow had been tight with worry for days, finally relaxed into a faint smile. Before he could speak, someone else darted forward and shouted, "Welcome back, our great hero." From the first time I met him, I knew this lord was noble and extraordinary. "Listen, everyone, let's shout together. Long live Li Wei, long live the great hero." Bard's brief softening vanished. "Alfred, you," a townsman, unable to restrain himself, kicked the interrupter to the ground. "What are you doing? We're celebrating the hero." Alfred, sprawled on the floor, protested indignantly. The crowd descended. Thump, smacks, and shoves. Townsmen pummeled and dragged him, and a few took the opportunity to slap him. In moments, he passed out and was hauled away. Li Wei could only shake his head helplessly. Some people were beyond saving. The commotion passed. The elves, who had been silent until then, turned together and bowed to Li Wei. Thranduil himself strode across and greeted him. "Welcome back, Li Wei. We have been waiting for you." Thorin looked from Thranduil to the gathered elven host and hesitated a beat, then stepped forward. "Tonight we hold a feast to celebrate our victory. I hope you will join us. As I said at the roadside fort, if one day you come to dwarven halls, we will answer in kind. Now, allow me to say it properly. Welcome to Erebor." Those nearest quieted. Even Gandalf and the other lords watched with smiles. Under 100 expectant eyes, Li Wei straightened and replied formally, "Li Wei, at your service." A cheer rose. After this battle, the people of the Lonely Mountain, the Iron Hills, the Woodland Realm, and Dale regarded Li Wei as a blooded ally, a figure with the standing of a lord, second only to a king. His influence would only grow from here, spreading across Middle-earth, reaching even the shadowed lands of Mordor. Mordor, 5000, Third Age, 2941, November. The gates of Erebor stood wide. Dwarves, elves, and men moved through the halls beneath blazing fires. Roasted meats and strong drink laden the tables. The hosts had gone out of their way for once to accommodate elven tastes. Fruits, vegetables, and lighter dishes were plentiful. "It's no small thing to get them all to stand together in harmony," Gandalf observed, popping a grape into his mouth. "Sweet," he decided. "Actually," Li Wei replied, "it's not entirely harmonious." He nodded toward a long table where a dwarf and an elf were locked in a drinking contest, surrounded by a cheering ring. Dwarves favored ale, less potent but drank in great quantities, while elves favored stronger wines. Between volume and strength, it was impossible to predict a winner. Legolas surely had the skill for such contests, Li Wei thought, but the elf was nowhere to be seen. After the battle, Legolas and Tauriel had left independently. They had not returned with the rest. It seemed the young archer was avoiding his father. Gandalf ate a few more grapes, exchanged greetings with Li Wei, then slipped away. No one knew where he went. With nothing pressing, Li Wei took a spot at a nearby table and gnawed on some of the dwarves' roasted specialties. He had barely begun when several dwarves clattered down and sat opposite with a clang. Gloin, Oin, Beefer, Bofer, Bomber, and Balin. Li Wei recognized them as members of the expedition. "Can I help you?" he asked. "You once drank a dwarf under the table and weren't even drunk," Gloin said, narrowing his eyes. "Oh?" Li Wei smiled faintly. "Is this about getting even?" "We'll let you use relay tactics," another grumbled, "but you underestimate us." Gloin admitted, "In many things you outmatch all of us, but to boast about drinking before dwarves, that's arrogance." "Then do you want to compete?" Li Wei asked. Gloin shook his head and shoved the broadest dwarf forward. "Bomber, it's your turn." Bomber thumped his chest with a whoop. Balin chuckled and brought 2 large barrels of strong liquor, filling cup after cup. The rest of the dwarves watched with grins as the contest began. Meanwhile, in the hall before the throne, Thorin still held the Arkenstone. He stared long at it, silent. Memories from his youth crowded in, his grandfather on the throne, his father and he at either side. The moment he saw his grandfather swallow that pale stone, his face full of wonder and doubt. "I am not you," he thought. The obsession and hatred that had dogged him felt like a 100-year wilderness. Now at last they were gone. He lowered the Arkenstone and did not look at it again. "Thorin." A warm voice at the entrance surprised him. Gandalf had been waiting. "You seem in good spirits," the wizard said, a rare smile crossing his face. "There has never been a better time than now." Thorin exhaled. "I feel as if I were a wanderer who had wandered through 100 years of wilderness under obsession and hatred. Today they have vanished. I have a home again." "Good, very good." Gandalf nodded gravely, then added, "There is one thing I never told you." "What?" "It was your father, Thrain, who asked me to tell you. He said—" Gandalf paused and then quietly, "He always loved you, Thorin." Thorin's breath caught. He closed his eyes, swallowed hard, and voice rough with feeling, said, "I understand. Thank you, Gandalf." Chapter 97. Going Home. When Thorin and Gandalf returned to the banquet hall, the atmosphere was wild. Dwarves and elves staggered and laughed. Some lay passed out across tables, others snored on the floor, wine still clutched in their hands. The two peoples had always been at odds, but tonight even the rivalry had been drowned in drink. The people of Dale had been swept up in it all. Some cheered, some picked up instruments and played until someone else started banging on the tables to keep time. It was a noisy, joyful chaos. Nearby, a large table drew attention. "Hiccup, this cup is to our victory," Gloin announced for the umpteenth time. "This makes the 5th toast, Gloin," Li Wei said, clinking cups with him, then downing a large goblet in one go. Gloin lifted his cup several times, inhaled, and then, seemingly unable to force a sip. Li Wei grinned. "Uncle Gloin, are you planning to raise fish in that cup?" he teased. "If you leave that much, the fish will drown." "That's an insult," Gloin snapped, mustering indignation, and then, with a determined tilt of the head, drained his wine. For a moment he sat upright, then went limp. Thud, his eyes rolled back and he sagged beneath the table, wine pooling at the corner of his mouth. "You're next, Balin," Li Wei said, refilling a cup and pointing at the only dwarf still standing. The others had long since succumbed to sleep, snoring and forgetting their earlier boasts of staying sober. Balin waved his hand frantically. No, better I make tracks now. I have things to do." Gandalf sat, picked up a cup, clinked it with Li Wei, and drained it. Thorin dropped into a seat, lifted another cup, and clinked it against Li Wei's. "So the rumors were true," Thorin said, smiling. "Your capacity for drink matches your prowess in battle." He emptied his cup. Li Wei handed him another. "Not bad. You don't look phased. Just a little sleepy." Thorin turned to Balin, who forced a weary smile. Yes. Quite good," Balin agreed, though inwardly he hoped those words wouldn't reach the ears of the dwarves sprawled on the floor. They'd likely feel foolish for a long while. After dispatching the bravest dwarves under the table, a notification popped up above Li Wei's thoughts. Durin's dwarves' reputation plus 100. He barely glanced at it. At his current standing, 100 points was trivial. If he wanted, he could ask Thorin for a lordship then and there, and no one would object. The elves included. As lord of the territory that included Long Lake Town, Dale, his reputation was beyond question. His name had already found its way into their songs. Outside the hall, the scene was quieter. The great eagles, too large for the crowded interior, clustered outside, tearing at meat. Radagast and Bjorn joined them. Radagast was indiscriminate about food. Bjorn, despite being able to shift into a huge bear, preferred berries, honey, bread, and vegetables. He avoided meat whenever possible. The Eagle King had planned to leave right after the war, but Thorin asked them to wait a few days to accept thanks. With food on offer and no pressing business, the Eagles and Bjorn agreed to stay. "I suppose he wants to express gratitude to you," Radagast said to the Eagle King. "Peace is thanks enough," Bjorn replied, and many agreed. Inside Dale's ruined city wall, it was deserted. Legolas stood alone, leaning on the parapet, gazing out across the battlefield as if lost in thought. He had already chosen voluntary exile. As he prepared to descend, someone stepped in his path. Thranduil. The king's face brightened when he saw his son unharmed. The two stood quietly for a moment. "I cannot go back," Legolas said first. "Where will you go?" Thranduil asked. "I don't know." "Cross the misty mountains, go west," Thranduil said in a faraway tone. "There is a city, Leeway's territory. Much will change there. Perhaps you should see it for yourself. You might also come into contact with the Dunedain of the north and learn from them until their chieftain returns." Legolas listened, nodded, and started away. After a few steps, Thranduil called out, a little flustered, "Legolas." Legolas stopped. Thranduil looked at his son's back and spoke softly. "Your mother always loved you, more than anyone, more than life itself." "I did too," Thranduil thought. He didn't say it aloud, but the emotion needed no spoken words. Legolas bowed, touched his heart, and extended his hand. Thranduil mirrored the gesture. To elves, it was an embrace. Legolas walked on until he was out of sight. Thranduil shut his eyes, collected himself, and turned away. For years he had been consumed by the loss of his wife's heirloom, taken by dwarves, and had nearly forgotten the most precious thing she'd left him, their son. As he walked, he saw, on the other side of the wall, an elf and a dwarf leaning together and looking up at the stars. Thranduil's expression hardened, and he hurried away. Night passed, whether quiet or boisterous. The next day, the dwarves donned armor and gathered in the great hall. Thorin, in his crown and kingly robes, stood on a raised platform as the coronation began. Li Wei, the expedition members, faction leaders, 2 wizards, and the skin changer sat in the VIP section watching. Thorin glanced at them and nodded once. Balin raised his sword and shouted, "Long live the king!" "Long live the king!" echoed the hall, weapons aloft. Thorin bowed slowly. The coronation was brief and solemn. Afterwards, Thorin presented a golden crown to the Eagle King and swore that dwarves and great eagles would be allies for generations. Bjorn, who had helped in the war, was rewarded in friendship and goodwill, enough to shift his view of dwarves. Wizards needed nothing, except for Saruman. They did not seek worldly rewards. The peace of Middle-earth's free peoples was their best payment. Later, Thorin and Thranduil met before the throne. Thorin had Keely fetch a box from the treasury and presented it. Inside, the gems glittered like starlight, Thranduil's wife's white gems, returned at last. The dwarves did not retract them this time. Old grievances between dwarves and elves found a temporary close. In the mountain's cellar, Li Wei wandered, stretching. He had helped repair terrain and reopen blocked paths, bringing the lonely mountain back to its former shape. On a stair sat Bilbo, staring at the piles of treasure. "So much gold," Bilbo said. "Honestly, I don't know what to do with it all." "If anyone heard you say that, they'd be jealous enough to lose sleep," Li Wei said, joining him. Even a 1/15th share of the hoard was enormous. Melted into bars, it would overflow any backpack. It was freedom of a kind. "This could fill 10 houses," Bilbo muttered. "I don't want my house filled with gold." Li Wei smiled. "You must have plans for this gold." Bilbo's eyes lit up. "Your golden apples are made of gold. I think you can put this to better use. Take it. I'll take just enough for my future, and the rest I give to you. You need it more than I do." Bilbo's casual decision to part with such a fortune, enough to buy many shires, surprised Li Wei. "I'll accept it, Bilbo," he said. "If you have time, visit the roadside fort often. The door will always be open to you," Bilbo added. "And take some of these. If you ever feel ill, just bite one." Leeway synthesized a stack of golden apples and placed them in a sack for Bilbo. Bilbo hesitated over carrying so many, and in the end, left them in Leeway's care. After farewells, Thranduil and the elven host returned to the Mirkwood. The Eagle King flew off with Radagast and Beorn, and Gandalf and Bilbo stayed a little longer, waiting for Leeway. But Leeway's mind was not at rest. From the city wall, he looked out over the ruins of Dale. Below, townsfolk craned their necks up at him, waiting for him to speak. Bard stepped forward. "The townsfolk are waiting for your instructions," he said. "You are the de facto lord here." Leeway peered down. The crowd's earnest faces confirmed Bard's words. A system prompt flickered up in Leeway's mind. Resident count has met the standard. Faction establishment conditions are met. He opened his faction map. His holdings were split, roadside fort in the east, Dale in the west, divided by a mountain range. The distance between them would take ordinary people months. As a faction, the territories were discontinuous. Perhaps later a road could be built. For now, the urgent matter was Dale. In name and in reality, it had become his territory, and the people and Bard were willing to accept his leadership. In truth, two men were seen as natural leaders, Leeway and Bard. Leeway had a godlike air. He slew the evil dragon, held back the orcs, and saved lives. Bard was human through and through, a hard-working townsman with a family and the same daily struggles as his neighbors, who still found the strength to help them resist corruption. Both had earned respect. Leeway could have taken the crown at once with no objections, but that would have been hollow consent. "Bard, are you sure you want me to be the lord?" Leeway asked. "All of us have no objections. It's our unanimous wish," Bard replied. "This is your land, really. We're not giving it to you. You already are its lord." "All right," Leeway said. "Then, my first command as lord." Below the wall, the people fell silent. "I appoint Bard as deputy of Dale," Leeway announced. "All affairs of the town will be handled by him. He will have full authority to manage Dale. And I entrust to you 1/15 of the treasure within the Lonely Mountain," he added. "Use it for the reconstruction and future of Dale." Bard bowed. "Your command will be followed." A notification confirmed. Deputy of Territory appointed Bard. The townsfolk cheered for their lord and their deputy. "Oh, by the way, Lord, what about Long Lake Town?" Bard started to ask, immediately taking on the role of planning for the future. "No, don't call me Lord. I'm not used to it. Call me Leeway," he interrupted. "All right, Lord Leeway," Bard blurted. "What did you just say?" "Lord Leeway," Bard repeated, then corrected himself. "Sorry, Leeway." "That's better," Leeway said. "Long Lake Town isn't officially my territory." "But, don't argue. I heard the mayor ran off and his deputy disappeared." "I'm here," someone shouted from below and promptly fainted. Ignoring the commotion, Leeway turned back to Bard. "Long Lake needs a new mayor. You grew up there. You know it. The people want you to lead. Frankly, worldly power and wealth mean little to me. Things like that should be left to those better suited." Bard accepted the responsibility with a slight unease. Leeway gave off an odd impression. He cared for some things and not for others. He could be pleased or vexed, but always with a certain distance, as if he were playing through an experience instead of clinging to it. A king disguised as a merchant might value the act of selling more than the money from it, but push him too far and he would resist. With the initial formalities done, Bard, now deputy of Dale and acting mayor of Long Lake Town, set to work organizing reconstruction and relocating people back to the lakeside town. Leeway took a hands-off approach on his first day as lord. He wanted, above all, to go home, to harvest his crops, and, while he had the chance, build a nether passage between Roadside Fort and Dale. Walking in the nether took less distance. 1 meter there was the equivalent of 8 meters in the world. A private nether gate would make travel between his holdings vastly quicker. Nether gates could only be built inside one's territory, but Leeway had plenty of territorial quota left. "Maybe I'll use this to create fast routes specifically for travel," he mused, and set off west with Gandalf and Bilbo. They stopped at Mirkwood and at Beorn's home, where they were well received. In crossing the Misty Mountains, they passed through the most dangerous defile without sighting a single orc or warg. At the front gate of Orc Town, Leeway called, "Is anyone home?" and received no reply. "They aren't very hospitable," Leeway said. Gandalf only nodded. Bilbo stood a little apart, staring at the shattered great gate and the 2-meter pit before it. He reached into his pocket and felt for a small, familiar object. It was still there. The goblins of Orktown had been less than welcoming. Before leaving, Li Wei took some stones he had on hand and helped block the main gate. The road was made temporarily safe. Beyond the mountains, they spent time at the Ogre Forest's hoard. Bilbo left with 2 large, foul-smelling chests under his arms, packed with treasure. Even that share alone would set his family comfortably for years, and later the Shire would joke about how the Bagginses never seemed to run out of money. But Bilbo decided to return home first, tidy his affairs, and then come back. At the fork leading to Bree and Roadside Fort, the 3 parted, Li Wei toward Roadside Fort, Gandalf and Bilbo toward the Shire. At the Shire border, Gandalf stopped. "We must part here," he said. "That's a pity," Bilbo replied. "I enjoyed traveling with you two. You both bring me good fortune." "Do you truly think it's all just luck?" Gandalf asked, taking a step closer. "Do you really believe all your escapes and adventures were mere chance? That ring you have, do not use it lightly." Bilbo opened his mouth to protest, but Gandalf went on before he could. "Don't play coy. I know you found something in the tunnels of Orktown." "All right," Bilbo said. Arguing with a wizard was no use. "I understand. I'll be careful." "You're a good hobbit, Mr. Baggins. I have enjoyed traveling with you. In this vast world, you and I may be small things, but sometimes small things change the world, simply because they have no other choice." Bilbo didn't fully grasp the meaning, but he listened. They shook hands, said farewell, and Bilbo went back into the Shire while Gandalf watched. Li Wei had already reached Roadside Fort well before. Returning after more than half a year, he found new things near his wall. In an open space not far from the gate, a few crude tents had been set up, and people lived there. Curious, he called out, "Hey, over there! What are you doing?" The tent dwellers froze and then came out one by one. When they saw Li Wei, astonishment gave way to joy. "The Lord, the one who saved us. He's back. Thanks to Hidden Moon Azure Wolf for a 500-point reward. Thanks to Silent Ta for a 500-point reward. Thanks to Shy Little Starfish for a 500-point reward. Thanks to XXGGXX for a 100-point reward. And thanks to all who voted. Thank you for your support." Chapter 98, Establishment of Camp. Around the lonely mountain lay a vast wasteland, barren, scarred, full of blackened stumps and dry earth. Records said it had once been a greenhouse of life until the dragon arrived and incinerated everything with its fire. Ever since, people called it Smaug's Wasteland. "Help anyone?" a voice croaked. On that waste, a corpulent man lay curled on the ground, gasping and crawling. He was the former village chief of Long Lake Town. "Please, anyone, give me water, give me food. I'll give you everything I have, half of it." He shouted until the wind took his words. No one answered. With a final, tragic roar, he died alone among the ashes and stumps, forgotten and abandoned. When he chose to abandon his people, he had ultimately abandoned himself. Far from that scene, in front of the Roadside Fort's walls, Li Wei stood facing a group of refugees and scratched his head. "It's been a while since I left on that trip." "It looks like you've been here some time," an old man replied. "Yes, sir. We arrived at the start of autumn." An elderly village chief from the refugee group stepped forward. "The Misty Mountains were too dangerous. We couldn't climb the passes, so we came by a long detour." "I remember you," Li Wei said. "If I'm not mistaken, you're their village chief?" "Yes," the old man answered. Li Wei glanced back. "There should be more people from your village than this. Where did the others go?" "They left," the chief said. "We passed many relatively stable towns. Some people didn't want to travel further and stayed behind. Those who came with us are the ones willing to give up the comforts of those places to seek refuge here." "All right," Li Wei nodded. "Since I pointed the way and you followed it, welcome to Roadside Fort." The refugees cheered, shouting the name of the fort lord. Li Wei led them toward the gate. The old chief almost reminded him that the gate looked impossible to open, but restrained himself. This was not his place to question. Li Wei pulled a lever. Click. The iron gate beside it parted. "Come in from here." Mechanisms for gates were understandable, but as the refugees crossed the threshold and entered, one of them could not help exclaiming, "I've never seen anything so beautiful." The old village chief, who had never traveled far beyond the river valley, nearly sighed. Outside the walls were smooth, cold ramparts that hid whatever lay within. Once inside, the place was warm and dreamlike. Neat paths, lights that never went out, flowers and clear ponds, lovely houses everywhere, and a great castle at the center. Livestock grazed in pens without human tending. Crops grew fat and healthy in neat plots. It was a city, yet there were almost no people, only tall, gentle iron golems who offered flowers to newcomers. A little girl reached out from her mother's arms and took one, grinning. "Mommy, is this the castle from your story?" "No," her mother said, kissing her forehead. "Mommy can't tell such a nice story." The old village chief's face showed worry as he took in the near-perfect scene. He swallowed and asked cautiously, "Can we really live here?" "Houses are built for people to live in," Li Wei replied. "This is where you will live from now on." His answer only increased their unease. Finally, the chief asked what everyone else was thinking. "Sir, what will we do? Most of us are farmers. The place seems to provide everything. What use are we?" Li Wei recognized the core of the problem. He had everything he needed here, but he couldn't let people do nothing for the rest of their lives. He opened the faction system. A single prompt awaited. Resident count has reached standard. Faction establishment conditions met. He had put off creating a faction because naming it always stumped him. The first territory was called Roadside Fort for obvious reasons. The second already had a name, River Valley City. Now he needed a faction name. Names mattered. They fit the land and culture. Rivendell, Lothlorien, names with meaning. Staring at the map, one territory a flowered plain west of the Misty Mountains, the other a mountain-bound city east of the Black Forest, he resisted the impulse to casually borrow elven names. In the end, he typed, Free City States. Faction Free City States successfully established. A cascade of system messages followed. Faction reputation unlocked. Resident system unlocked. Permission management unlocked. Li Wei felt dizzy from prompts. "I'll be back in a bit." He told the refugees, "You should rest." He read the faction descriptions. Faction reputation would track contributions and misdeeds, an oversight tool. Permission management let him create classes and set joining conditions tied to prestige points. He could create a resident class that required prestige. Being a resident would unlock workbench use and crafting permissions. The system also recorded numbers, 203 people waiting at the gate, which saved him the trouble of counting. Li Wei set up the first ranks. Tourist, prestige required 0. Tourists could use wooden tools and gain faction prestige by labor. Only when prestige reached certain levels and one swore allegiance could a tourist be promoted to resident. Residents required 10 prestige points. They could use the workbench to craft stone tools and chests, though the Lord's chests remained locked to others unless he permitted access. "For now, this will do," Li Wei muttered. Back at the gate, he organized the refugees. They rose when he approached, eyes fixed on him. "Don't worry, there are plenty of things you can do here," he told them. "But first, fill your stomachs and get a place to live." They were gaunt and exhausted. Production would wait until they'd recovered. Li Wei set a large table in the square and piled several stacks of bread on it. "Take food, take as much as you need, then choose a house as a family unit." He found the village chief and spoke privately. "Handle the distribution. After everyone's settled, come to the castle. I'll need help." "As you command," the chief said, bowing, and began to marshal the people. Li Wei breathed easier. Having someone organized made the job manageable. He returned to the castle to sort his backpack. It was full. Dragon hearts, dragon blood, dragon scales, leftovers from Smaug's enormous body. He had only carried back the most important materials. The rest were stored in chests in River Valley, to be retrieved once a nether passage was established. The village chief soon sought him out. "My lord, we're done organizing. Any further instructions?" "Follow me." Li Wei crafted a set of wooden tools and led the chief to the kitchen garden. He handed over a wooden hoe. "Try harvesting." The chief took it awkwardly, swung once, and stared at the carrots that fell free from the soil. "Did I see that right? It just dropped out by itself?" "You saw correctly. The crops here do that," Li Wei said. "Think of this place as enchanted. Everything in the territory has a bit of magic." The chief's eyes lit up. He kept his composure, but inside he felt his heart soar. Their lord was a mage, someone with real power. Hope returned to him and to the refugees who had followed this man across dangers and hardships. "Now plant the carrots," Li Wei instructed. The chief complied. Soon a row of green shoots pushed through the moist soil. Li Wei tested other things: feeding animals at the pasture, cutting wood, digging stone. When the chief removed stone, it didn't immediately turn into inventory drops. The stones were separated from their native positions and became movable objects. Only when they were thrown into a funnel or touched by Li Wei did they convert to normal drops and go into inventory. If a stone was merely placed back, it resumed being part of the ground and required a pickaxe to sever again. In short, within the territory there was effectively an extra non-stackable slot for world objects, an unusual but useful mechanic. The chief watched everything in stunned silence. The place was too strange, too perfect. It felt like a waking dream. Li Wei summarized their plan aloud: planting, raising animals, mining and woodcutting, producing food and basic building materials. That's what tourists can do now. As they contribute and gain prestige, they can become residents and unlock more tools and permissions. He paused, glancing at the faction name displayed at the top of the interface. Naming trouble nagged him even now. He still hadn't come up with something perfect, but the faction existed, the people were safe, and the first steps toward a functioning camp had been taken. Chapter 99: Labor. After teaching the village chief how to perform labor inside the territory, Li Wei took him through a few demonstrations of the territory's peculiar traits. For example, how objects behave underwater. The rules that govern the territory applied to everything inside it. People and things were treated like biological entities, and to some extent, took on the territory's properties. Or rather, the territory's rules affected them. Pausing the practical experiments, Li Wei turned back to the old chief. "If you want to stay here, you must reach the resident rank within 1 year. Once you become residents, you'll be able to craft these tools yourselves." The village chief's face went suddenly serious. "You mean, if we become residents, we can also use this magic to make tools?" Li Wei let him translate the meaning in his own way. "You could say that." Li Wei wasn't bothered to correct him, as long as the man understood. "Oh, and as my residents, you'll never lack food or shelter, but you must perform a certain amount of labor every day. Except for children, anyone at the resident level or below must work at least 6 hours a day. You might not be familiar with our timekeeping, but 6 hours is roughly half a day." "That's so short?" The old chief frowned, not in objection but in disbelief. "You're too generous. This lord not only took them in and gave them shelter and food, he was willing to share his magic, and the only cost was work that was so light it stunned the old man. In the past, most villagers labored from sunup to sundown, meals and rest tied to their tasks. The idea of working a fixed few hours and then being done was foreign. This method of managing the territory was unlike anything he had seen. "I know it may seem monotonous," Li Wei continued, "but it's necessary if you want to stay. When you're promoted above resident, you can reduce the required time. If anyone refuses, they can leave at any time. But note, once you leave, you cease to be a resident here and lose access to what the territory provides." "No, I will not leave even if I die," the village chief blurted, immediately solemn. "I will join the Free City States and give everything I can to the territory's development for the rest of my life." "Listen first." Li Wei raised a hand. "I don't force what kind of work you do. You can choose tasks that interest you for your daily labor. As your reputation rises, the trades you can learn and the things you can make will increase. You'll also unlock the ability to craft more items like I can." He synthesized a wooden hoe on the spot to demonstrate. "I think I understand," the old chief said, quickly running through everything in his head and summarizing. "So if we do simple labor each day, we can gradually learn more magic and create more with it, and we can use the magic to do things we're interested in?" "Yes, that's roughly it." The village chief was good at distilling things into simple terms and phrasing them in a way his people would grasp. Li Wei didn't bother correcting the specialized wording. The meaning was what mattered. After going over the territory's rules again and making sure the chief understood, Li Wei added, "I've shown you the basics. Now go and teach the others how to do it." That will count as a contribution to the territory and earn you reputation points, he added. I understand, sir. The old chief accepted the task and hurried off. Following Li Wei's instructions, the village chief gathered the people, residents now, and demonstrated how to perform labor within the territory, how to put things into hoppers, how to breed animals, plant trees, harvest apples, and so on. After the practical demonstration, he explained the promotion rules. Lord Li Wei has a magical ability to see how much each of us contributes. If we contribute enough, we can use the magic he shares with us. A murmur went through the crowd as the meaning sank in. Once they understood, some of them immediately rolled up their sleeves and set out to find tools and begin working. Everything they did would be recorded. There would be no risk of their efforts going unrecognized or stolen. Li Wei's gaze would account for each contribution. Work would translate directly into reputation and opportunity. For a few ambitious folk, this prospect lit a fire in their eyes. For most, it brought a heavy sigh of relief. After wandering in hunger, a stable, long-term place to live was worth more than anything. If they and their families could eat and sleep safely, that was already immense comfort. Everything else could wait. Half a day of work seemed little by comparison to their past lives. Many felt the new life bordered on luxurious. They could have been content to live like this forever. But Li Wei knew human nature. Once material needs were met, people began to seek fulfillment. When life is threatened, people yearn simply to live. When starving, they crave even the coarsest bread. Once they have endless coarse bread, they start to want better things. Needs build in layers. As the residents recovered and their lives stabilized, their ambitions would creep higher. Over time, even without mandatory requirements, many would rush to contribute more, eager to create the value and opportunities they desired. Chapter 100: Residents' Issues. The old village chief's explanation didn't take long. He deserved the title. He was cut out for it. Unlike Long Lake Town's corrupt mayor, who had clawed his way into power with demagoguery, this man had been genuinely elected by people who believed in his ability to lead. Li Wei said little, but he willingly took on the duty of oversight to keep his villagers from doing anything reckless. In truth, even without his supervision, they wouldn't dare slack off. Their lord's reputation was simply too great, so great that even if they camped outside the city walls, no orc or bandit would dare approach. That prestige alone suppressed most mischief. On top of that, they now knew their lord had a magic that could see each person's contribution to the territory, which made the residents keep order even more willingly. Li Wei didn't yet realize how far the residents' enthusiasm for visible, tangible progress would run. While they collected tools and began simple production work in an orderly fashion, Li Wei found an empty spot in the city, built a ring of lava around its perimeter, and placed the fire dragon egg in the center. The egg felt the heat and immediately entered incubation. To be honest, Li Wei still couldn't say which mod the egg came from. When it had appeared in his inventory, the crafting table had suddenly unlocked items from 2 mods at once: ice and fire and dragon mounts. He guessed the egg must be a cross-compatible object, usable in systems from both mods. The egg pulsed occasionally with life, but after a long wait, there was no sign of it cracking. It didn't look like it would hatch anytime soon. Li Wei shrugged, went to the warehouse, fetched some sturdy fireproof building materials, and enclosed the incubation area completely. That way, if the egg hatched unexpectedly, it wouldn't cause trouble. Then, he went to the blacksmith and applied the knockback enchantment to the elven ancient sword. He had already decided on a name after earning the Orc Nemesis title at Raven Hill. Nemesis. Its meaning was obvious. Anyone who made an enemy of Li Wei would feel they had met their nemesis. He drew the sword and inspected the newly appeared inscription. From now on, it could be considered a famous blade. The tally of orcs and wargs it had cut down was in the thousands, including 2 orc chieftains. Even without Li Wei present, throwing that sword into an orc encampment might be enough to send them into panic. To orcs it carried an aura of fear, much like a blood-stained mace might strike dread into free peoples. After enchanting and renaming the sword, Li Wei looked at another item in his inventory: dragon scales. Armor made from dragon scales would have 6 more armor points than netherite alloy, but there was a catch. it did not provide knockback resistance. Swap out his netherite alloy for those extra 6 points and a strong hit. Azog's hammer, an ogre's massive palm, a behemoth's blow, could still send him flying. Without netherite's knockback resistance, he'd have been launched repeatedly in the Lonely Mountain fights. So after considering it, he decided to keep his netherite alloy armor for now. It was sufficient for current combat. He could wait for the fire dragon to hatch and then forge dragon steel. Armor made from that had a staggering 34 armor points. With dragon steel, even someone like Sauron might struggle to break through unless in full form and wearing the ring. Thinking of other matters, Li Wei walked toward the Hellgate and opened his map. The straight-line distance from Roadside Fort to River Valley City was over 100 kilometers, an exasperating span. A round trip between those two territories, even taking the Nether shortcut, would still involve covering 140 kilometers. If he wanted a Nether highway from Roadside Fort to River Valley City for maximum efficiency, even a single block-wide path would require at least 140,000 blocks of blue ice. It takes 9 ordinary ice blocks to craft 1 packed ice, and 9 packed ice to craft 1 blue ice, so 1 blue ice equals 81 ordinary ice blocks. That meant building the road would take roughly 11.34 million ordinary ice blocks, enough to fill more than 3,000 large chests. Li Wei thought about the blue ice he'd harvested last winter. It wasn't nearly enough to build a tenth of the highway. He hadn't stayed at the ice farm all winter anyway, distracted by other things. He sighed and left the warehouse. This was a long-term project. Fortunately, the climate was already cooling toward freezing. One good snowfall in winter would be here, and he could resume ice collection. The highway didn't strictly need blue ice. Packed ice would work too, albeit slower. Boats on blue ice could reach 72 meters per second, while packed ice maxed out at about 40 meters per second. Slower, but still faster than horses, and packed ice saved 9 times the material compared to blue ice. With effort, he could gather enough packed ice in a winter. As he walked back to the castle, mulling it over, he saw someone waiting at the gate. The old village chief stood there. "What is it? Is something wrong?" Li Wei asked. "It's like this, my lord," the chief said awkwardly. "We do have a few questions. I didn't mean to trouble you, but everyone asked me to bring them." "That's fine," Li Wei said with a smile. "Ask whatever you like. Don't be afraid. I'm not an ogre." The old chief relaxed a little and relayed the townspeople's questions. The topics made Li Wei inwardly amused. One person asked if they could take extra magic seeds and plant them in their own courtyards, Veed said, almost apologetic. "If that's presumptuous, I beg your pardon. Most of us were farmers, hungry and wandering once, and when we saw things that could be planted, we wanted to plant some at our own homes. There's no other intention." "That's fine," Li Wei replied. "Take them and plant them. The seeds here mature in 3 days, and pumpkins even grow several times a day. You can plant as many as you want, just don't waste." 3 days? Veed's mouth fell open. Li Wei had not told him that before, and the old man was stunned. He'd assumed the magic crops were only cold and lodging resistant and could be planted in winter. He hadn't expected them to grow so fast. "I understand. We will not waste this food. Thank you for your generosity," Veed said, visibly excited. "By the way," Li Wei added, "what's your name?" "Veed, my lord." "Good, Veed. I see you have great prestige among the residents and served as their village chief. From today on, you'll act as the community representative. You'll collect the residents' opinions and consolidate them to give feedback to me," Li Wei explained. "Remember what a representative means. You represent. You can present their requests, but you don't decide for them." "I understand. I'll do it well, my lord," Veed said, bowing. He'd heard of such roles before. Summarize problems, relay them upward. As a village chief, he had usually had to propose solutions too, but this role suited him. Li Wei had another concern. The current residents were former villagers who understood the outside world's hardships. They would be thrilled by the productivity inside the territory. Their children, though, might take these miracles for granted. If future residents grew up thinking crops everywhere matured in 3 days, those children could be badly unprepared if they ever left. Li Wei didn't want spoiled youngsters who couldn't tell territory resources from the outside world's limits. He asked Veed to organize common sense education, teach the children how the territory differed from the outside, so future generations wouldn't form unrealistic expectations. Veed immediately understood and promised to work with the community on proper education plans. After that, he continued to relay more resident questions, most trivial, like the seed request. A few even asked if they could work all day. Those were the folks who liked to push themselves. Li Wei told them that would accelerate their progress to becoming official residents. Veed left to report Li Wei's answers. Li Wei returned to the castle, rested for a moment, then looked out at the sky and over the territory. He no longer needed to personally gather the basic resources. Residents were carrying out their tasks and routinely depositing materials into the hoppers, steadily filling the inventory. Those basic materials would back future large-scale projects. Thanks to Ice-Sealed Mu for the 1,000-point reward, thanks to Hidden Moon Kanglang for the 500-point reward, and thanks to everyone who voted and supported me.